This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't sleep through the night without waking up in a cold sweat, hearing Dave's screams echoing in my head. It's been 8 months since our camping trip, but every time I close my eyes, I'm right back there in those woods, watching my friend's ankle get crushed in that rusted metal trap, his blood pooling on the forest floor. We were supposed to have a fun weekend. That's all it was meant to be, just 5 friends getting away from our crappy jobs and apartment problems. Something we'd done a dozen times before. Rob had found this spot online that was supposed to be untouched wilderness about 3 hours from the city. It sounded perfect. No cell service, no other campers, just us and nature. God, I wish we'd just gone to a regular campsite with other people around. I remember how excited we all were that morning. Me, Rob, Jenna, Jay, and Dave had packed Rob's SUV with way too much gear and enough food to last a week, even though we were only staying for 2 nights. We'd been friends since high school, all 23 now except for Jay, who was 24 and never let us forget he was the elder of the group. The drive up was nothing but jokes and singing along to playlists. Dave kept complaining about his new hiking boots being too stiff. That detail haunts me now. We arrived around 2 in the afternoon. The spot was as isolated as promised. We had to park at this little clearing and hike about 40 minutes to reach the area Rob had picked out. I remember Jenna saying it felt creepy, being so far from everything, but we all laughed it off. Dave said something about how this was real camping, and not that tourist crap we usually did. I wish we'd listened to Jenna's instincts. Everything was fine at first. We set up our 3 tents in a small clearing near a stream. Rob and Jay got a fire going while Jenna and I sorted out the food supplies. Dave wandered around taking pictures with his fancy camera he'd saved up for months to buy. The sun was starting to lower in the sky, and we'd planned to do a short hike before dinner to explore the area. That's when everything went to hell. Dave had walked maybe 30 yards from our campsite, just over a small ridge where the stream curved around. We heard this terrible metallic snap, followed by the most horrific scream I've ever heard. Not like movie screams. This was primal, guttural, the kind of sound that freezes your blood. We all ran toward the sound. I think I was first to reach him. Dave was on the ground, his face ghost white, both hands clutching at his right ankle. This massive, rusty metal bear trap had clamped onto his leg. The teeth of it had gone straight through his new hiking boot and into his flesh. Blood was already soaking through his jeans. There was this moment where none of us moved, just pure shock. Then Dave screamed again, and Jay snapped into action. He dropped to his knees next to the trap, trying to figure out how to open it. I remember Rob yelling, "Don't touch it," and Jenna starting to cry behind me. I just stood there, useless, watching Dave writhe on the ground. Jay finally figured out the release mechanism. But when the trap opened, it was even worse. Dave's ankle was completely mangled. I could literally see white bone fragments through the torn flesh. His boot was shredded and soaked dark red. The smell hit me then. That metallic blood smell mixed with something else, something that made me gag. Looking back, I think it was the beginning of infection from that filthy, rusted trap. "We need to get him to a hospital," Jay said, already taking off his belt to use as a tourniquet. Rob was pacing, running his hands through his hair. "The car's almost an hour away if we're carrying him." I'll never forget the look on Dave's face. This mixture of pain and terror that didn't even look human anymore. Jenna had grabbed our first aid kit and was trying to wrap gauze around his ankle, but the blood just soaked through immediately. "We need to carry him," I said. It was the only option. We abandoned everything except our backpacks with water and a few essentials. Jay and I positioned ourselves on either side of Dave, getting him to put his arms around our shoulders. Every time we moved him, he made this whimpering sound that was somehow worse than the screaming. Rob took point with his pistol. He always carried it camping for protection against animals. Jenna followed behind with more bandages, replacing them whenever Dave's leg soaked through the current ones. The trek back was a nightmare. What had taken us 40 minutes to hike in was taking twice as long going back. Dave kept passing out from the pain, then waking up screaming when we jostled him. His face was getting paler by the minute, and the bandages weren't doing much to stop the bleeding. We'd been walking for maybe 30 minutes when I heard the first shot. At first, I thought it was a car backfiring somewhere far away. Then I heard the zip of something passing close to my head and a crack as it hit a tree behind us. Rob spun around, his pistol already drawn. "Get down!" he shouted, pushing Jenna toward a fallen log. Another shot rang out, sending splinters flying from a tree trunk just feet from where Jay and I were struggling to lower Dave to the ground. That's when I realized someone was shooting at us. Rob fired 3 shots in the direction the bullets had come from. "Run!" he yelled at us. "I'll cover you!" Jay and I hoisted Dave back up, who was now barely conscious. The movement made him scream again, but we had no choice. Jenna ran ahead of us, looking back constantly with terror in her eyes. I could hear Rob behind us firing occasionally. We were running blindly through the woods, branches whipping across my face, drawing blood from tiny cuts. Dave was dead weight between us now, his head lolling forward. I was terrified he was dying. More shots came from somewhere to our left, and we changed direction, veering right. "Who is it?" Jenna kept asking, her voice high and panicked. "Who's shooting at us?" None of us had an answer. I couldn't even see anyone, just occasional flashes through the trees where bullets splintered wood. I kept thinking this couldn't be happening. This kind of stuff happens in movies, not to regular people on a camping trip. Rob caught up to us, breathing hard. "Keep moving," he panted. "I think I see the trail to the clearing up ahead." My arms were burning from supporting Dave's weight, but pure adrenaline kept me going. Jay was breathing in harsh gasps on Dave's other side. We stumbled onto the trail, moving as fast as we could toward where we'd parked. Behind us, I heard more shots, but they seemed farther away now. I've never been so happy to see a vehicle in my life as when Rob's SUV came into view. We practically threw ourselves the last few yards. Rob unlocked it with shaking hands, and Jay and I maneuvered Dave into the back seat. His jeans were soaked through with blood from knee to ankle, and the makeshift bandages were dripping onto the upholstery. I climbed in beside him, pulling his head onto my lap. Jenna jumped in the passenger seat while Jay got in the back on Dave's other side. Rob started the engine and floored it down the dirt road, the SUV bouncing so hard I had to hold Dave's body down to keep him from being thrown around. I remember looking back through the rear window, expecting to see someone emerge from the trees, but there was no one visible. "Hospital," Jay kept saying. "We need to get to a hospital now." Rob was already driving like a maniac down the winding forest road. 30 miles to Riverdale Memorial, he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Those 30 miles were the longest of my life. Dave drifted in and out of consciousness. I kept talking to him, saying anything I could think of to keep him with us. "Stay awake, Dave. We're almost there. You're going to be okay." Empty promises that I had no way of knowing were true. Jenna was on the phone with emergency services the moment we got cell reception, telling them to have doctors ready. When we finally pulled up to the emergency entrance, there was a team waiting with a gurney. They whisked Dave away, leaving the four of us standing in the parking lot, covered in his blood and forest dirt, trying to explain to hospital security what had happened. The doctors later told us that if we'd been even 15 minutes later, Dave might have lost his leg from blood loss. As it was, he needed multiple surgeries to repair the damage. The trap had shattered his ankle, severed tendons, and caused a compound fracture that required pins and plates to reconstruct. The police came to take our statements while we waited for news about Dave's surgery. They sent officers to investigate the site, but by the time they got there, our camping gear was gone. The bear trap had been removed. There was nothing but trampled vegetation and blood-soaked earth to show what had happened. They never found any bullet casings or evidence of who had been shooting at us. 8 months later, and there are still no answers. Dave walks with a cane now and says he'll never have full use of his foot again. The doctors say he's lucky to still have it at all. We've all been going to therapy, trying to process what happened. None of us have gone hiking or camping since. I can't even walk through the small wooded park near my apartment without having a panic attack. Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering who was out there in those woods. Was it the same person who set the trap? Were they trying to kill us or just scare us away? And why? The police suggested maybe illegal hunters or drug operations in the area, but nothing was ever proven. I jump at loud noises now. The sound of a car backfiring sent me diving under a table at a restaurant last month. Rob sold his pistol. Jenna moved back in with her parents. Jay switched to working nights because he says he can't sleep, after dark anyway. And me? I keep seeing Dave's face when that trap snapped shut. I keep hearing those shots echoing through the trees. I keep feeling the weight of my friend's body as we carried him, thinking he might die before we reached help. I used to love the outdoors. Now I see danger lurking behind every tree. I don't think any of us will ever be the same after what happened that day in the woods. And the worst part is not knowing who or why or if they're still out there, waiting for the next group of friends who just wanted to spend a weekend in nature. Story 2. I've never told this story outside my therapy sessions. My therapist actually encouraged me to write it down, said it might help process what happened. It's been over 30 years, but I still get chills thinking about it. It was the summer of 1992. I'd been dating Sarah for about 8 months. We were both 24, just starting our careers in Seattle. I was always the outdoorsy type, hiking, camping, fishing, but Sarah was more of a city girl. She'd grown up in Chicago and moved to the Pacific Northwest for college. The most nature she generally experienced was the occasional picnic at Green Lake. But I was determined to share my love of the outdoors with her. After weeks of gentle convincing, she finally agreed to go hiking with me near Mount Rainier. I picked what I thought was a perfect trail for beginners, a 6-mile round trip through old-growth forest. Not too steep, beautiful scenery, and well-maintained. I'd done it a dozen times before. We set out early that Saturday morning in July. The weather was perfect, about 65 degrees, clear blue skies, not a cloud in sight. I remember Sarah wearing these brand new hiking boots she'd bought for the occasion. They were still stiff, and she complained about them rubbing against her heels, but she was in good spirits overall. The first hour was everything I'd hoped for. The forest was peaceful, with just enough filtered sunlight coming through the massive Douglas firs and western red cedars. We saw a couple of chipmunks, and Sarah even spotted a woodpecker. I remember feeling so happy watching her experience this environment for the first time. She kept stopping to take photos with her little point-and-shoot camera. We had a snack around the 2-hour mark, some trail mix and apples. Sarah seemed to be enjoying herself, though I could tell she was getting tired. Her new boots were causing blisters, but she insisted we continue. "I want to make it to that viewpoint you mentioned," she said. The viewpoint was about another 30 minutes ahead, where you could see a small waterfall and part of the mountain if it was clear. As we continued, I noticed the forest getting denser, the trees closer together. The trail narrowed a bit too, forcing us to walk single file at times. I went ahead, occasionally stopping to wait for Sarah, who was moving slower due to her feet hurting. The forest had become strangely quiet. No birds calling, no squirrels chattering. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Sometimes the woods go silent like that. But looking back, it was the first warning sign. We were about 3 miles in when it happened. I'd gotten maybe 30 yards ahead of Sarah and stopped to wait for her at a slight bend in the trail. I turned around to see her frozen in place. I mean completely still, like a statue. Her face had gone white, and she was staring intently at something off to the side of the trail. "Sarah?" I called out. She didn't respond, didn't even blink. I walked back to her, concerned. When I reached her side, I asked what was wrong. She still didn't speak, just raised her arm and pointed. I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw it. About 20 feet off the trail, partially hidden by some undergrowth, was a full-grown buck. But it wasn't standing or lying down like you'd expect. It was inside a tree. I know how that sounds. I've spent 30 years trying to rationalize what I saw, but there's no other way to describe it. The deer was literally embedded in the trunk of a massive old cedar tree. The front half of the buck, its head, neck, and front legs, emerged from one side of the trunk, while its hind legs dangled from the opposite side. The deer's head hung down, its eyes open and glassy. Its antlers, which must have been at least an 8-point rack, seemed to droop toward the ground. My first thought was that someone had mounted a taxidermied deer to the tree as some kind of sick joke. But as I cautiously approached, while Sarah remained frozen on the trail, I could see this wasn't the case. The tree showed no signs of being cut or damaged to accommodate the deer. The bark appeared smooth and natural around the animal's body, as if the tree had somehow grown around it. Or worse, as if the deer had somehow phased through the solid trunk and gotten stuck. What disturbed me most was the condition of the deer. It didn't look decomposed or desiccated. It appeared fresh, like it had been alive very recently. But there was no blood, no torn flesh. Nothing to indicate violence or how it had become fused with the tree. The integration between wood and animal was seamless, impossible. I reached out, I don't know why, some morbid curiosity, and touched the deer's snout. It was cold and stiff, but not in the way of normal rigor mortis. It felt almost like the deer was turning into wood itself. That's when I noticed the complete silence. Not just quiet, absolute silence. No wind in the trees, no distant sound of other hikers, nothing. It felt like we were in a vacuum, or like time had stopped around us. And then came the feeling. I've never experienced anything like it before or since. A sense of dread that started at the base of my spine and crawled upward, making every hair on my body stand on end. Not just fear, something deeper and more primal. It was the absolute certainty that we were being watched, that we had stumbled upon something we were never meant to see. I backed away slowly from the deer tree, never taking my eyes off it. When I reached Sarah, I took her arm. She was trembling. "We need to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Now." I nodded, unable to speak. We turned and began walking back the way we'd come. After a few yards, our pace quickened to a power walk, then a jog, and finally a full-on run. I don't remember making a conscious decision to run. It was instinctual, like our bodies knew something our minds couldn't process. We ran most of the 3 miles back to the trailhead, only stopping when our lungs burned too much to continue. Even then, we only walked long enough to catch our breath before running again. Sarah's blisters had burst, and I later saw her socks were soaked with blood, but she never complained once during our retreat. The entire time, I felt like something was right behind us, just out of sight, following, watching. I kept glancing back, but the trail behind us was empty, yet the feeling persisted. The strangest part? As we got closer to the trailhead, the forest sounds gradually returned, first distant, then louder. By the time we reached the parking lot, birds were singing, and we could hear other hikers chatting as they started up the trail. Everything seemed normal again, but we weren't normal. We sat in my car for maybe 10 minutes, not speaking, just trying to calm our racing hearts. Sarah's face was still pale, her hands shaking as she gulped water from her bottle. Finally, she turned to me and said, "Promise me something." "Anything," I replied. "Promise me we'll never talk about what we saw, not to each other, not to anyone." I nodded, understanding instinctively. Talking about it would make it real, would force us to confront what was impossible yet undeniably there. "I promise," I said. We drove back to Seattle in near silence. The radio played, but I don't remember a single song. I dropped Sarah off at her apartment, and she kissed me briefly before going inside. We had dinner plans for the next evening, but she called to cancel, saying she wasn't feeling well. 2 weeks later, she broke up with me. Said she needed space, that things were moving too fast. But I knew the real reason. Every time she looked at me, she saw the deer in the tree. I was a reminder of something her mind wouldn't process. I've kept my promise all these years, never spoke of it to anyone until my therapist. I tried to research similar phenomena a few times over the years. The closest I found were tales of devil trees in folklore, or stories of strange forest phenomena from various cultures. Nothing that explained what we saw. I still hike those mountains. I've even gone back to that same trail a handful of times over the decades. Never alone, though, and I've never ventured off the main path again. I've never seen anything like the deer in the tree since that day, but I feel its presence every time I'm in the woods. A reminder that there are things in this world that exist beyond our understanding. Sometimes in my dreams, I'm back on that trail. In the dreams, I always go closer to examine the deer. And sometimes, just before I wake up in a cold sweat, I swear I see the deer's eye blink. Story 3. I still have nightmares about Ledgeview. It's been 17 years, but I can't shake what happened there in early September of 2006. Every time I close my eyes, I see those pale, glass-like eyes staring at me from between the trees. I've never shared this with anyone outside the police report and a therapist who probably thinks I'm crazy, but I need to get this out there. Maybe someone has seen something similar. Ryan, Mike, and I had been friends since middle school. We were inseparable through high school, but college and jobs pulled us in different directions. By the time we were approaching 30, we barely kept in touch beyond occasional texts and Facebook comments. It was Mike who suggested we reconnect with a camping trip to Ledgeview, a spot deep in the state forest in Connecticut that we had discovered during our senior year of high school. We named it Ledgeview because you had to climb a steep rock ledge to reach this perfect little clearing near a stream. Not many people knew about it, since it wasn't on any official trails. The plan was simple: 3 days of camping, fishing, and reconnecting. No cell service, no interruptions, just the three of us, like old times. I remember being excited as I packed my gear the night before: tent, sleeping bag, fishing tackle, and plenty of beer. Mike brought his portable speaker and a bottle of whiskey. Ryan packed enough food for a week, despite it being a weekend trip. We met at a diner near the forest entrance around noon on Friday. Ryan looked basically the same: tall, lanky, with that goofy smile that hadn't changed since high school. Mike had put on some weight and grown a beard, but his laugh was still infectious. We caught up over lunch, talking about our jobs, relationships, and how weird it was to be adults now. It felt good, like no time had passed at all. The hike to Ledgeview took about 2 hours. The forest was beautiful that day, sunlight filtering through the trees, birds chirping, that earthy smell of soil and pine needles. We reached the ledge around 3 in the afternoon. It was about 15 feet high, not a technical climb, but steep enough that we had to pass our packs up one by one. At the top was our clearing, just as we remembered it, a flat area about 30 feet across with the stream running nearby. We set up camp quickly: 2 tents, Ryan in one, Mike and I sharing the other since mine was bigger. We collected firewood, filtered water from the stream, and settled in for the night. The first evening was perfect. We drank, played music, and talked about our high school days. Mike brought up that time we tried to sneak into a concert by climbing the fire escape and got caught by security. Ryan told embarrassing stories about my first girlfriend. We laughed until our sides hurt. Around midnight, we turned in, slightly drunk but happy. I fell asleep almost instantly. I woke up early the next morning, maybe around 6. Something felt off. The air was heavy with mist that clung to the ground, swirling around in unnatural patterns. The stream looked different too, darker somehow, with a reddish-brown tint I hadn't noticed the day before. I chalked it up to the early morning light and my slight hangover. Mike woke up shortly after me, looking tired. "Did you hear that stuff last night?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "What stuff?" "Footsteps around the tent. Thought it was you or Ryan taking a piss, but it went on for a while. I hadn't heard anything." Ryan emerged from his tent a few minutes later, completely fine and excited about fishing. Neither of us mentioned the footsteps to him. We made breakfast and spent the morning fishing in the stream. The catch was disappointing, just 2 small trout that weren't worth keeping. After lunch, we decided to explore deeper into the woods. We'd never gone too far from camp during our high school visit, so this was new territory. About a mile from camp, the forest began to change. The trees grew closer together, blocking out most of the sunlight. The ground became soggy, with patches of black mud that sucked at our boots. It was unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing but the sound of our breathing and footsteps. Ryan spotted it first, a structure between the trees. As we got closer, we realized it was some kind of shelter made from branches and what looked like animal hide stretched over them. It was crude but deliberate, about 5 feet tall and wide enough for someone to crawl inside. "Probably some hunter's blind," Mike suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. I peered inside and immediately wished I hadn't. The ground was covered with small animal bones, squirrels, rabbits, birds, arranged in bizarre patterns. Some formed spirals, others formed what looked like letters in an alphabet I didn't recognize. In the center was a larger bone, possibly from a deer, with strange markings carved into it. "We should go," I said, backing away. The others agreed without argument. The walk back to camp was tense. None of us wanted to admit how unsettled we were, so we made jokes about Blair Witch and tried to laugh it off. But something had changed. The forest felt hostile now, as if we were being watched from all sides. As evening approached, the mood at camp remained somber. We built a fire larger than necessary, as if the flames could keep away whatever was out there. The whiskey bottle circulated more frequently. We talked less. Each crack of a twig in the darkness made us jump. "Maybe we should leave tomorrow morning instead of staying the extra day," Ryan suggested. Mike and I quickly agreed. We went to bed around 10 that night, earlier than planned. Nobody wanted to sit around the fire anymore. The forest had gone completely silent, not even the sound of the wind in the trees. Just silence, broken occasionally by the gurgling of the stream, which now sounded more like choking than water flowing over rocks. I don't know how long I slept before Mike shook me awake. "Ryan's gone," he whispered, his voice tight with panic. I fumbled for my flashlight. Ryan's tent was empty, his sleeping bag open as if he'd just gotten up. His shoes were still there, which meant he'd left barefoot. "Maybe he went to take a leak," I suggested, but even as I said it, I knew something was wrong. Nobody wanders off barefoot in a forest at night. We called his name, softly at first, then louder. The forest seemed to swallow our voices. We decided to search around camp first, staying close together with our flashlights, cutting through the darkness. That's when we found the first item. Ryan's t-shirt, the one he'd been wearing when we went to bed, laid out perfectly flat on the ground about 20 yards from camp. Further ahead was his watch, then his wallet, then his jeans, all arranged in a perfect line leading deeper into the woods. "What the fuck?" Mike whispered. My mouth was too dry to respond. We followed the trail of belongings, moving slowly, constantly scanning the trees around us. The line led us about a quarter-mile from camp, ending at Ryan's boxers laid out on a flat rock. Beyond that, nothing. And then I saw it. Just a glimpse at first. Movement between the trees about 50 yards ahead. I raised my flashlight, and the beam caught a figure standing motionless among the trunks. It was tall, much taller than any person should be, with limbs that seemed too long and thin. But what froze the blood in my veins were its eyes, pale, milky white, reflecting the flashlight beam like pieces of glass. "Mike," I whispered, but he had already seen it. We both stood paralyzed, watching as the figure tilted its head at an impossible angle, studying us. Then it took a step forward, and we broke. We ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping our faces. I could hear something moving behind us, not running exactly, but a rapid clicking sound like bones tapping together. We didn't stop until we reached the ledge, scrambling down it in the darkness. I cut my hand open on a rock but barely felt it. At the bottom, we pressed our backs against the rock face, gasping for breath. The clicking sound had stopped. Nothing followed us down the ledge. "What the fuck was that?" Mike kept repeating, his voice breaking. "What the fuck was that?" I had no answer. We stayed at the base of the ledge until sunrise, too terrified to move, too terrified to go back for Ryan, too terrified to leave and navigate the forest in darkness. When the first light broke through the trees, we climbed back up to camp. Everything was disturbed. Our tents collapsed. Supplies scattered across the clearing. In the soft dirt near the stream were strange footprints that looked like elongated human hands, fingers digging deep into the soil. There was no sign of Ryan. We grabbed what we could, wallets, car keys, phones, and hiked out faster than I thought possible. We went straight to the police station in the nearest town and reported Ryan missing. They didn't take us seriously. Two panicky guys talking about strange footprints and a tall figure in the woods. They assumed we'd all gotten drunk, Ryan had wandered off, and we'd worked ourselves into a state of panic. They said they'd send someone to check the area, but I could tell from their faces they thought Ryan would turn up with a hangover and a story about getting lost. A week later, Ryan's mother called me. She'd received Ryan's wallet in the mail. The postmark was from a town in Pennsylvania, 3 states away. Inside the wallet was everything you'd expect: credit cards, driver's license, some cash, plus a photo none of us had taken. It showed the 3 of us standing by the stream at Ledgeview, smiling at the camera. But none of us had brought a camera. None of us remembered taking that photo. When Ryan's mom scanned and sent me the picture, I noticed something in the background. Between the trees behind us, partially hidden in shadow, was a tall, blurry figure with pale, milk-like eyes. Mike became obsessed with finding Ryan. He called me daily with new theories, new plans to go back to Ledgeview. I refused. A week after getting the photo, Mike disappeared too. His roommate found a note saying he was going back to find Ryan. He never returned. I tried to move on with my life. I changed jobs, moved to a different state, saw therapists who prescribed medications for what they called trauma-induced delusions. But the nightmares never stopped. 3 months after Mike disappeared, I went back to Ledgeview. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I could find answers. Maybe I thought it would give me closure. I brought a revolver. Illegal, but I didn't care. The clearing was exactly as we'd left it. Collapsed tents, scattered supplies. But the strange footprints were gone, washed away by rain. I stood there for hours, waiting, watching. Just as I was about to leave, I heard it. That clicking sound like bones tapping together. I turned and saw it standing at the edge of the clearing, taller than before, its skin like bark, eyes like milky glass. It tilted its head that impossible way, studying me. I ran. I don't remember much about the hike out. I remember dropping the gun. I remember falling several times. I remember the clicking sound always just behind me. I made it to my car somehow. As I fumbled with the keys, I looked in my rear-view mirror and saw it standing at the forest edge, watching me drive away. That was 17 years ago. I still hear the clicking sometimes, outside my bedroom window at night. Sometimes my phone will ring, and there's nothing on the other end but the sound of a stream gurgling like it's choking. And sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I can see pale, glass-like eyes watching me from the dark corner of my room. Story 4. I've never shared this experience with anyone outside my immediate family and a few close co-workers. Even after 30 years, I still get this cold, hollow feeling in my chest when I think about it. I'm almost 70 now. And I guess I want someone to know what happened before I'm gone. Back in '93, I was working as a forest surveyor for the Canadian Park Service. My job was documenting forestry conditions, tracking wildlife patterns, and mapping areas of Vuntut National Park in Yukon that needed updated surveys. I'd been doing this kind of work for 15 years by then, so I knew the wilderness like the back of my hand. That August, I was assigned to a particularly remote section in the northeastern part of the park. We're talking about true wilderness. No roads, no trails. Nothing but endless forest, mountains and rivers for hundreds of miles. The kind of place where you could walk for weeks without seeing another human being. I loved it out there. At least I did until that day. I'd been in the backcountry for 4 days, camping and surveying as I went. The weather had been perfect. Cool mornings, warm afternoons, clear skies. I remember feeling particularly good that morning. I'd slept well, had a decent breakfast of instant oatmeal and dried fruit, and packed up camp early. Around noon, I was hiking through a dense stretch of old-growth spruce and pine. The forest floor was covered in moss and lichen, everything damp from the morning dew. I was using my compass to maintain a straight transect line for my survey when I noticed something odd through the trees ahead. At first, I thought it was just sunlight breaking through the canopy, creating one of those natural spotlights you sometimes see in the forest. But as I got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. The trees ahead looked wrong. Even from 50 yards away, I could tell their color was off. Not the deep greens and browns of a healthy forest, but something pale and unnatural. When I finally broke through the tree line into the clearing, I stopped dead in my tracks. What I saw made absolutely no sense. In front of me was a perfect circle, maybe 40 feet in diameter, where everything, and I mean everything, had been bleached white. The trees, the soil, even the moss and fallen logs, all completely drained of color. It looked like someone had poured bleach over the entire area, but that wouldn't explain what I was seeing. The trees around the perimeter were all leaning outward, away from the center, like they'd been pushed by some tremendous force, not broken or damaged, just permanently bent, away from whatever had happened there. Their bark was intact but completely white, like paper. I'd seen plenty of strange things in my years in the forest: lightning strikes, microbursts, old forest fire damage, but nothing like this. This was precise, deliberate looking. The circle was mathematically perfect as far as I could tell. I remember taking a deep breath before stepping into the circle. The air felt different, thinner somehow, and completely still. The normal sounds of the forest, birds, insects, the rustling of leaves, were completely absent, just dead silence. I approached the center of the circle carefully, my boots making no sound on the bleached soil. That's when I found the crater. Right in the middle of this bizarre circle was a perfectly round depression, about 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep. It looked scooped out, with smooth sides, like someone had pressed a giant bowl into the earth and then removed it. I knelt down to examine it. The soil inside the crater was the same bleached white as everything else. I reached out to touch it, then hesitated. Something in my gut told me not to make contact. Instead, I used a stick to poke at it. The soil seemed normal in consistency, not particularly hard or soft, just white, completely devoid of color. I took out my camera and started documenting everything. I shot 2 full rolls of film, 72 exposures in total. Close-ups of the crater, wide shots of the circle, detailed images of the bleached trees and soil. As I was taking photos, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something standing at the edge of the circle, but there was never anything there. After about an hour of careful documentation, I decided to collect some samples. I had plastic sample bags in my pack, so I carefully scooped some of the white soil into one bag and stripped a small piece of bark from one of the bleached trees for another. I labeled them meticulously, as was my habit. That's when the headache started. Just a dull throb at first, behind my eyes. I figured it was dehydration. It was early afternoon by then, and though it wasn't particularly hot, I'd been working intensely. I took a long drink from my canteen and decided it was time to leave this place. As I was packing up my gear, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. At the very edge of the crater, partially buried in the white soil, was a small, shiny object. I carefully brushed away the soil to reveal what looked like a piece of metal, no bigger than a dime. It was silver-colored and seemed to have some kind of pattern etched into it, though I couldn't make out any details. When I tried to pick it up, it felt unusually warm to the touch, and I swear it vibrated slightly against my fingertips. I dropped it into a separate sample bag. By the time I left the circle, my headache had intensified. I remember checking my watch. It was just after 2 in the afternoon. I had about 4 hours of hiking to reach my next planned campsite, but I decided to push further and try to make it to the ranger station instead. Something about that place had unsettled me deeply, and I wanted to get back to civilization sooner than planned. 3 hours into my hike back, the nausea hit. It came on suddenly and violently. I barely had time to drop my pack before I was doubled over, vomiting into the underbrush. My head was pounding now, like someone was driving nails into my skull. My vision started to blur, and I was sweating profusely despite the cool temperature. I knew I was in trouble. The ranger station was still at least 3 hours away, and my condition was deteriorating rapidly. I tried to radio for help, but all I got was static. Either the terrain was blocking the signal, or something was interfering with the transmission. I forced myself to keep moving. The next few hours are a blur in my memory. I remember stumbling through the forest, falling several times, getting up and continuing. At some point, I lost one of my sample bags, the one with the metal fragment. I was too sick to go back for it. By the time I saw the lights of the ranger station, the sun had set, and I was barely conscious. I remember calling out, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and hollow. The last thing I recall is the shocked face of Mike Brennan, one of the seasonal rangers, as he ran toward me. Then everything went black. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Whitehorse. The doctors told me I'd suffered from a severe viral infection, possibly transmitted by an insect bite. They'd pumped me full of antibiotics and antivirals, rehydrated me, and monitored me for complications. Physically, I was on the mend, though extremely weak. When I tried to tell them about the white circle, the crater, and how I believed it had caused my illness, they exchanged those looks that medical professionals give when they think a patient is confused or delusional. They attributed my vivid hallucinations to the high fever I'd been running. After 5 days, they discharged me. My supervisor, Dave McIntosh, picked me up from the hospital. On the drive back, I told him everything. To his credit, he didn't dismiss me outright. He listened patiently, asked a few questions, then promised we'd develop my photos and look into it. A week later, the photos came back from processing. Every single shot I'd taken of the normal forest was perfect, clear, well exposed, exactly what you'd expect. But every photo of the white circle, all 52 of them, showed nothing but static. White, grainy static, as if I'd photographed a TV screen with no signal. Some had faint, blurry shapes that might have been trees, but the circle itself, the crater, all the details I'd so carefully documented, completely absent. When I showed Dave the soil sample I'd collected, it wasn't white anymore. It looked like ordinary forest soil, dark, rich, with bits of organic matter mixed in. The piece of bark was the same, just normal pine bark, slightly dried out from being in the plastic bag. Nobody openly accused me of making it up, but I could tell what they were thinking. That I'd gotten sick in the woods, became delirious, and hallucinated the whole thing. Or that I was trying to cover up some mistake I'd made, inventing a fantastic story instead of admitting I'd failed to follow proper wilderness protocols. I took 2 months of medical leave to recover fully. When I returned to work, I requested to be assigned back to the same area. I was determined to find that circle again, to prove I wasn't crazy. Dave hesitated but eventually agreed. Over the next 5 years, I made 17 separate expeditions to that region of the park. I covered hundreds of square miles of wilderness, using GPS coordinates, topographic maps, and my own field notes to try to retrace my steps. I never found it again, not even a trace. In '98, I was promoted to a senior surveyor position that kept me in the office more than the field. By 2004, I was supervising the survey department and rarely went into the backcountry anymore. Eventually, I stopped actively searching, but I never stopped wondering. I never stopped seeing that perfect white circle in my dreams or feeling the unexplainable wrongness of that place. I never forgot the sensation of being watched by something I couldn't see. When new rangers or surveyors joined the service, I would casually mention strange phenomena in the woods, unusual clearings, unexplained sick feelings. Most of them laughed it off as the ramblings of an old woodsman trying to scare the rookies. A few listened more carefully, but none ever reported finding anything like what I'd seen. I retired 5 years ago. My wife thinks I've put it all behind me, but some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, the image of that white crater vivid in my mind. I've researched meteorite impacts, fungal growths, secret military testing, and dozens of other potential explanations. Nothing fits. Whatever I encountered that day was something outside normal experience. It wasn't a meteorite. There was no impact debris. It wasn't radiation or chemicals. The hospital found no traces in my system. It was something else, something that shouldn't have been there. The forest has always been my home, my sanctuary. After that day, I never felt completely safe in the wilderness again. There's always that nagging feeling at the back of my mind, a certainty that there are things out there we don't understand, things that don't want to be understood. I'm almost 70 now. I don't have many years left to find answers. Sometimes I think about making one final expedition, trying one last time to find that circle. But another part of me is afraid of what might happen if I did find it again. Or worse, what might find me. Story 5. I've been asked to share my experience regarding my colleague Joseph Wood Jr., who we all called Joe. I'm still struggling to make sense of what happened, and maybe writing this down will help me process everything. I was part of the search team that looked for Joe after he went missing at Mount Rainier in July of 1999, and the whole situation still haunts me to this day. I worked with Joe at the same publishing house in New York for about 4 years. He was brilliant, the kind of editor who could take a mediocre manuscript and find the diamond buried inside it. We weren't close friends, but we had a solid professional relationship and occasionally grabbed drinks after work. When he mentioned he was heading to Seattle for Unity 99, I remember telling him to enjoy the Pacific Northwest and jokingly warning him not to get lost in all those trees. God, I wish I hadn't said that. Joe was excited about the trip. He'd been talking about it for weeks, saying how he needed to clear his head after finalizing a particularly challenging book project. The conference was his main reason for going, but he'd specifically mentioned wanting to see Mount Rainier. A New Yorker needs to remember what actual nature looks like sometimes, he told me. I didn't think much about Joe during the conference. We were both busy with different sessions and networking events. The last time I saw him was on July 7th, when we briefly crossed paths in the hotel lobby. He was carrying his prized Swarovski binoculars and mentioned he was planning to skip the next day's sessions to go hiking. "I've been sitting in conference rooms for 3 days straight," he said. I need to see something besides PowerPoint presentations. When Joe didn't show up for our scheduled flight back to New York on July 11th, I initially figured he'd changed his plans or maybe extended his stay. But then his assistant called me the next day, asking if I'd heard from him. That's when the worry started creeping in. By July 13th, we'd confirmed that Joe hadn't checked out of his hotel, his rental car was missing, and no one had heard from him since the 8th. That's when I decided to stay in Washington and help with whatever search efforts were being organized. I couldn't just go back to New York while Joe was missing. The park rangers found his rental car on July 14th, parked at the Longmire Visitor Center. Everything inside was exactly as you'd expect. His suitcase in the trunk, a coffee cup in the holder, his hotel key card in the center console. Nothing seemed out of place. The only things missing were the items he would have taken hiking, his binoculars, his bird guide, probably a water bottle and some snacks. I joined the search efforts on July 15th. I'd never been part of anything like this before, and the scale of it was overwhelming. There were park rangers, volunteer search and rescue teams, dog handlers with their search dogs, and even helicopters scanning from above. The terrain around Comet Falls was beautiful but treacherous. Steep slopes, dense forest, slippery rocks near the creek, and there was still snow on the ground at higher elevations, which made the search even more difficult. We spread out along the trail and surrounding areas, calling Joe's name until our voices gave out. The park rangers interviewed that hiker, Bruce Gomond, multiple times. He seemed genuinely shaken by the whole situation. He kept saying, "I should have convinced him to turn back with me." But according to Bruce, Joe had been in good spirits, excited about seeing the waterfall and possibly spotting some alpine birds. He seemed perfectly fine, Bruce told us. Prepared, alert, happy to be there. He wasn't acting strange or disoriented. He just wanted to go a bit further up the trail. Those words stuck with me because they eliminated some of the easier explanations. Joe wasn't lost or confused when last seen. He wasn't ill or injured. He was simply hiking a popular trail in broad daylight. By day 4 of the search, I started noticing a strange tension among some of the search team members. The rangers maintained their professionalism, but there was an undercurrent of unease that went beyond the normal stress of a missing person case. I overheard 2 of them talking when they thought no one was listening. "It's just like the Patterson case in '94, one said. "Let's not go there," the other replied sharply. "Focus on the search area we've been assigned." I wanted to ask what they meant, but something in their tone told me not to. Instead, I threw myself into the search with even more determination. On day 5, I was paired with a local volunteer named Mike, who'd been helping with search and rescue operations in the park for over a decade. As we carefully made our way down a steep section near Van Trump Creek, I finally worked up the courage to ask if there had been other disappearances like Joe's. Mike was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Mount Rainier has claimed its share of visitors over the years," he said carefully. "Sometimes we find them, sometimes we don't. But in a case like this," I pressed, "where someone just vanishes on a popular trail in good weather, that's not common, right?" Mike stopped walking and looked at me directly. "Look, I don't want to add to your worry, but there's something about this mountain. Most disappearances make sense. People get caught in bad weather, they're unprepared, they have a medical emergency. But every few years, we get a case that doesn't add up. Someone who should be fine just isn't there anymore." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What happens to them?" Mike shrugged. If I knew that, I'd be writing books instead of searching for missing hikers. All I know is that in 20+ years of doing this, there are a handful of cases that keep me up at night, and they all have the same pattern: experienced person, good conditions, popular area, no trace found. Not a scrap of clothing, not a backpack, nothing. We continued searching in silence after that. I couldn't stop thinking about what Mike had said. Was Joe just another mysterious case for the park's records? Another name on some list of the inexplicably missing? On July 17th, we found something. Not Joe, but a single lens cap that matched his Swarovski binoculars. It was lying on a rock about half a mile off the main trail, in an area where hikers rarely ventured. The rangers got excited, thinking we'd finally caught a break. We concentrated our search in that area for hours, combing every inch of ground, looking under logs, checking crevices between rocks. But that was it. Just a lens cap, no footprints, no disturbed vegetation, nothing to indicate how it got there or where Joe might have gone next. That night, back at the search base, I overheard another conversation, this time between a ranger and one of the dog handlers. The handler was visibly upset. "Dogs don't just lose a scent like that," she was saying. "They follow it, then it's gone. Not faded, not confused with other scents. Gone. Like he walked to that spot and then..." She didn't finish her sentence, but her hands made a gesture like something vanishing into thin air. "Write up your report and stick to the facts," the ranger told her firmly. "We don't need speculation." By July 18th, the intense search was being scaled back. The rangers explained that they'd covered all the likely areas multiple times, and the chances of finding Joe alive after 10 days were extremely slim. They'd continue to watch for signs during their regular patrols, but the major operation was over. I didn't want to leave. It felt like abandoning Joe, but I also knew I couldn't stay in Washington indefinitely, searching a mountain that seemed determined to keep its secrets. Before I flew back to New York, I hiked the Comet Falls Trail myself. I needed to see where Joe had last been seen. It was a beautiful day, just as it had been when he disappeared. The waterfall was stunning, a column of white water plunging down a sheer rock face. Birds darted through the spray, catching insects. It was exactly the kind of place Joe would have loved. I stood there for a long time, trying to imagine what might have happened. Had he slipped and fallen somewhere no one thought to look? Had he gone off trail to follow a rare bird and gotten lost? Had he encountered someone with bad intentions? None of the scenarios made sense, given the lack of evidence. As I started hiking back to the trailhead, something strange happened. For just a moment, I thought I heard someone call my name. It was faint, barely audible over the sound of the creek, but it stopped me in my tracks. I turned back toward the falls, scanning the area. "Joe," I called out, feeling ridiculous but desperate enough to try anything. There was no answer, just the constant roar of the waterfall and the occasional bird call. I waited, listening intently, but whatever I'd heard, if I'd heard anything at all, didn't repeat itself. Then the strangest feeling came over me. A sensation I can only describe as being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and despite the warm July weather, I felt suddenly cold. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming just moments before, now felt oppressive and alien. I've never hiked so quickly in my life. I practically ran back to the trailhead, irrationally terrified of what might be behind me. When I reached my rental car, I was sweating and out of breath. I looked back at the forest edge, half expecting to see something emerge from the trees, but there was nothing. Nothing except the mountain itself, looming over everything, serene and indifferent. Joe's parents hired a private investigator after I returned to New York. They spent thousands of dollars on continued searches, brought in specialized teams with advanced technology, even consulted psychics. Nothing ever turned up. Some of Joe's friends from the literary world created a memorial fund in his name that sponsors nature writing, which seemed fitting. The publishing house held a remembrance ceremony 6 months after his disappearance. It was a strange event, not quite a funeral, since there was no body, no certainty of death, just an absence that had never been explained. I think about Joe often, especially when I'm editing manuscripts or when spring migration brings bird watchers to Central Park. I wonder if we missed something obvious, if there was a clue we should have seen. Sometimes I dream about Mount Rainier. In these dreams, I'm always hiking toward Comet Falls, and I can see Joe up ahead on the trail. I call out to him, but he never turns around. He just keeps walking higher and higher until he disappears into the mist. It's been over 20 years now, and I still check the news from Washington State periodically, hoping for some resolution. I've read about other mysterious disappearances in national parks since then, and each one brings back the memories of those awful days in July 1999. I don't know what happened to Joe Wood on Mount Rainier. I don't know if anyone ever will, but I know that sometimes when I'm alone in quiet, natural spaces, I feel that same sensation I felt on the trail, that feeling of being watched by something unseen. And I wonder if Joe felt it too, in those final moments before he vanished without a trace. Story 6. I can still feel the cold air of that Halloween night when I think back to what happened, even though it's been years now. I was 16 at the time, stuck babysitting my little brother Ethan while all my friends were at Zoe's Halloween party. Mom and Dad had insisted I take Ethan trick-or-treating since they both had to work late. I remember being so mad about it. 16 years old and chaperoning an 8-year-old instead of hanging out with my friends. What teenager wouldn't be annoyed? Ethan was dressed as some superhero, Iron Man, I think, with this plastic mask that kept slipping down his face. I didn't even bother with a costume, just threw on my black hoodie and jeans. I figured I could at least text my friends while Ethan collected his candy. Maybe catch the tail end of the party if we finished early enough. We'd been out for maybe an hour, working our way through the Fairview neighborhood where we lived. It was getting dark earlier those days, and the streetlights were already on by 6:30. Most of the houses had their porch lights on, with fake cobwebs and jack-o'-lanterns set out front. Pretty typical suburban Halloween stuff. I remember I was standing at the end of the Miller's driveway, scrolling through Instagram and seeing all the posts from the party I was missing, when this white minivan pulled up alongside me. It wasn't anything special, just your average family minivan, a bit dirty with some rust spots near the wheel wells. The driver rolled down his window, and immediately I felt something was off. "Hey there, pretty girl," he said. "You need a ride somewhere?" He was maybe in his 40s, with this scruffy beard that wasn't well kept at all. His hair was greasy, pushed back from his forehead, and he had these eyes that just lingered too long. You know that feeling when someone's looking at you and it makes your skin crawl? That's exactly what it was like. "No thanks, I'm good," I said quickly, trying to sound confident while looking around to see if anyone else was nearby. There were other trick-or-treaters further down the street, but nobody close by. "You sure? It's getting cold out. I could take you wherever you need to go." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes at all. "I'm waiting for my brother," I said, gesturing toward the Miller's house where Ethan was still at the door getting candy. "I can wait for him too. Both of you can hop in." My stomach dropped. I knew enough about stranger danger to recognize this was exactly the kind of situation my parents had warned me about. I shook my head and stepped further away from the curb. "We're fine. Our house is just around the corner," I lied. He kept trying to talk to me, asking questions about where we lived, where we were headed next. I kept my answers vague, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, I saw Ethan coming back down the driveway, his plastic pumpkin bucket already half full of candy. The man gave me one last look before saying, "Maybe I'll see you around later," and driving off slowly. I watched as the van moved down the street, turning right at the corner, but not before I caught a glimpse of the license plate. It started with TRK, but I couldn't make out the rest. "Who was that?" Ethan asked, already digging through his candy haul. "Nobody, just someone asking for directions," I said, not wanting to scare him. "Come on, let's hit a few more houses and then head back." We continued trick-or-treating, moving through the neighborhood. I tried to focus on Ethan, but I kept scanning the streets, suddenly hyper-aware of every car that passed by. I texted my friend Amber about what happened, and she told me to take Ethan home right away, which just made me more anxious. About 20 minutes later, we were on Oak Ridge Drive when I saw it again. The same white minivan, crawling along the street toward us. My heart started racing. I grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him closer to me. "Lily, what's wrong?" he asked, confused by my sudden grip on his arm. "Nothing, just stay close," I whispered, trying to appear calm while looking for somewhere to go. There were other families around, which made me feel slightly safer, but not enough. The van pulled up alongside us again. This time the man leaned across the passenger seat to talk through the open window. "Hey, you two still out collecting candy? It's getting pretty late. Need a ride home?" His voice sounded friendly enough, but there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl. I could smell cigarette smoke wafting from the van, and behind him, I glimpsed what looked like blankets or something piled on the back seats. "No, we're fine," I said firmly, positioning myself between Ethan and the van. "Are you sure? It's no trouble. Getting cold out here." He looked at Ethan now. "Bet you're getting tired carrying all that candy, buddy." Something about him talking directly to my brother snapped me into protection mode. "We said no. Our dad is meeting us at the next corner," I lied again, this time more forcefully. His expression changed slightly, just a flash of something that might have been anger or frustration before he plastered that fake smile back on. "All right then, be safe out here. Lots of weirdos on Halloween." Then he drove off, a bit faster this time. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Ethan looked up at me, his Iron Man mask pushed up on top of his head. "Lily, who was that? Why did he want to give us a ride?" I made a decision right then. "Ethan, I think we should head home now. But we haven't gone to the Marshall Street houses yet. They give out the full-size candy bars." "I know, but it's getting late and—" I hesitated, not wanting to terrify him but needing him to understand. "I don't like that guy in the van. I think we should go home where it's safe." Thankfully, Ethan didn't argue too much. We turned around and started walking back toward our house, which was about 10 blocks away. I kept checking over my shoulder, scanning every side street we passed. For a while, everything seemed normal, just other kids in costumes with their parents, houses with their Halloween decorations, the occasional car driving by. We were cutting through Hampton Park when I spotted the white van again. It was parked at the far end of the small playground, headlights off, just sitting there. I froze, gripping Ethan's hand tighter. "What's—" Ethan started to ask, but I shushed him. "We need to go a different way," I whispered, pulling him back the way we came. "But this is the fastest way home." I know, but we're going to go around, okay? Like an adventure. I tried to make my voice sound exciting rather than terrified. We backtracked and took a longer route through a neighborhood we'd already hit up for candy. I kept looking back, and after a few minutes I saw the van again, this time moving slowly behind us, about a block away. He was following us. I was sure of it now. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to call my dad, but of course, because this is how horror stories work in real life, my phone was at 2% battery. I managed to send a quick text to my dad. Coming home now. Weird guy in white van following us. Almost home. Then my phone died. I don't think I've ever been so scared. We were still about 5 blocks from home, and this creep was clearly stalking us. I remembered all those missing kids posters you see, all those stories on the news, and suddenly they weren't just stories, they were a possibility becoming real right in front of me. Ethan, I said quietly, we need to run, okay? We're going to pretend to go to that house like we're trick-or-treating, but then we're going to cut through their yard and run as fast as we can. Are we in trouble? He asked, his voice small. I could tell he was finally sensing my fear. No, but I want to get home quickly. That man in the van is being weird. We approached a house we'd already visited, pretending we were going to trick-or-treat again. I glanced back and saw the van had stopped at the corner, watching us. As soon as we got to the side of the house, I grabbed Ethan's hand and we bolted through the yard, jumping over a small hedge into the next yard over. We ran through 2 more yards before emerging onto Cedar Street. I knew this would take us home if we followed it all the way down, but as we turned the corner, my heart sank. There, parked about halfway down the block, was the white van facing our direction. He had somehow anticipated our route. Change of plans, I whispered to Ethan, pulling him behind a large oak tree. We're going to run as fast as we can past that van, okay? Don't stop no matter what. Ethan nodded, his eyes wide with fear now. He'd dropped his candy bucket somewhere in our dash, but neither of us cared anymore. Ready? 1, 2, 3. We sprinted down the sidewalk. As we approached the van, the headlights suddenly flicked on, and I heard the engine start. The driver's door began to open as we drew level with it. I caught a glimpse of the man stepping out, reaching toward us. Hey kids, stop, he called out. But we didn't stop. We ran faster than I've ever run in my life, with Ethan somehow keeping pace beside me. I could hear footsteps behind us for a moment, then the sound of the van door slamming shut and the engine revving. Our house was just ahead now, its porch light like a beacon. I fumbled for my keys as we raced up the driveway, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Behind us, I heard the van turning onto our street. We burst through the front door, and I slammed it shut behind us, locking it and sliding the chain into place. Ethan was crying now, gasping for breath between sobs. "Dad!" I screamed. "Dad, help!" My father came running down the stairs, alarmed by our panic. "What happened? What's wrong?" Between gasps for air, I told him about the man in the van, how he'd been following us, trying to get us to go with him. My dad's face darkened with anger and fear. He looked out the front window just in time to see the white van crawling past our house. "Stay here, lock the door behind me," he ordered, grabbing his phone and a baseball bat from the closet. "Dad, no," I pleaded, but he was already heading out. I locked the door as instructed and watched through the window as my dad stood in our front yard, taking pictures of the van with his phone and shouting something I couldn't make out. The van accelerated and disappeared around the corner. Dad came back inside, immediately calling the police. While he was on the phone, we heard something that made my blood run cold. the sound of our back door handle turning. Someone was trying to get in. Dad grabbed the bat again and moved quickly to the kitchen. We heard his voice, stern and threatening. "I've called the police. They're on their way. Get away from my house now." There was silence, then the sound of footsteps running across our back patio. A moment later, we heard a car engine start up from the alley behind our house. The police came, took our statements, and searched the area, but the van was gone. They found some candy scattered in the yards where we'd run, and one of Ethan's Iron Man gloves that had fallen off during our escape. They told us they'd increase patrols in the neighborhood and took down the partial license plate, I remembered. I never found out if they caught him. Every time a white van drives by, even now years later, I feel that same cold fear wash over me. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd gotten into that van, or if we hadn't made it home in time. Halloween has never been the same for me since then. I still see that man's face in my nightmares sometimes. That greasy hair, that unkempt beard, those cold eyes that looked at me and my little brother like we were prey. Story 7. I still have nightmares about the whole situation. I work in mental health care in Sweden, and I've been trained to spot warning signs in patients, but I completely missed them when they were right in front of me in my own home. My hands are actually shaking as I type this, even though it happened months ago. I met Em at work. We were both caregivers at a psychiatric facility outside Stockholm. She was new and seemed nice enough. Quiet, kept to herself during breaks, but professional with the patients. We weren't close friends, just colleagues who occasionally chatted during lunch. About 6 months after she started, she approached me in the break room, looking upset. She told me she'd been evicted from her apartment because of a misunderstanding with her neighbor. According to her, she had accidentally entered the wrong apartment one night after working a late shift. She was exhausted, and the apartments in her building looked identical. She said she realized her mistake immediately and apologized profusely, but the neighbors were unreasonable and complained to the landlord, who gave her 2 weeks to move out. She looked desperate, and I had a spare room in my apartment. Against my better judgment, I offered to let her stay temporarily while she found a new place. She seemed so grateful, almost crying with relief. I remember thinking I was doing a good deed for a colleague in need. God, I was so naive. The first week was fine. Em was quiet, kept to her room most of the time, and was polite when we crossed paths. She paid her portion of the rent on time and even brought home pastries once. But things started changing during the second week. It started with small things. I'd wake up to find dirty dishes piled in the sink that hadn't been there when I went to bed. Food I'd bought for myself would disappear overnight. I'd find damp towels on the bathroom floor. When I gently brought these things up, Em would apologize profusely and promise to do better, but nothing changed. Then the night disturbances began. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning to the sound of Em moving around the apartment, talking to herself in whispers. Sometimes I'd hear her laughing quietly. When I'd get up to check, she'd be sitting in the dark living room, staring at nothing. She'd claim she had insomnia and didn't want to disturb me, but something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. After about a month, I started noticing other things. Sometimes my belongings weren't where I'd left them. Nothing was missing, just moved slightly. My hairbrush would be on the wrong side of the bathroom counter. My favorite mug would be in a different cabinet. My shoes would be arranged differently by the door. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was misremembering where I'd put things. But then I started finding small scratches on my furniture that hadn't been there before, as if someone had deliberately run something sharp across the surface. One morning, I woke up to find Em had eaten an entire week's worth of my groceries overnight. There were empty packages all over the kitchen, and she was nowhere to be found. When she came home that evening, I confronted her. She didn't deny it, but just stared at me with this blank expression and said, "I was hungry." I was getting increasingly uncomfortable, but I told. Myself, Em had mental health issues. She'd mentioned being diagnosed with schizophrenia, but said she was medicated and stable. As a mental health worker myself, I felt obligated to be understanding, but my patience was wearing thin. Then something happened that changed everything. I ran into Maya, an old classmate from school, at a cafe. We were catching up when I mentioned my new roommate situation. As soon as I said Em's name, Maya's face went pale. "Em? Short for Emma, like you? Works in mental health? Dark hair?" Maya asked. When I confirmed, Maya looked around nervously before leaning in close. "She didn't just accidentally enter a neighbor's apartment," Maya whispered. "My cousin lives in her old building. Em broke into an apartment in the middle of the night. The father woke up to find her standing over their baby's crib with a kitchen knife. He had to wrestle her to the ground. The police came, but she wasn't arrested because of her mental health diagnosis. The landlord evicted her instead." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. All the air left my lungs. I remembered how Em would sometimes stare at photos of my nieces and nephews that I had on the fridge, asking questions about them that seemed innocent at the time, but now felt sinister. I went home in a daze, unsure what to do. I couldn't confront Em with second-hand information, but I couldn't ignore it either. I decided to keep a closer eye on her while I figured out how to safely ask her to move out. That night, I was cleaning the apartment while Em was at work when I noticed something under her bed, a shoebox. I know I shouldn't have looked, but fear overrode my sense of privacy. Inside were bizarre items, small animal bones, locks of hair, not hers. They were different colors. A small doll made of twigs tied together with red string, and pages torn from books with strange symbols drawn on them. There was also a small notebook filled with incomprehensible writing and drawings of eyes. I carefully put everything back exactly as I found it, my heart pounding. I texted my boyfriend Marcus, asking him to come over immediately. I didn't feel safe alone anymore. Marcus arrived just before Em was due back from her shift. I told him everything, including what I'd found. He suggested we both stay in my room that night and lock the door. I agreed, too scared to confront Em directly. Around 2 in the morning, we were both jolted awake by the sound of my bedroom doorknob turning slowly. Thank God I'd locked it. Then came soft scratching at the door, like fingernails dragging across the wood. Marcus and I stayed completely still, barely breathing. Then the scratching stopped, and there was silence. Just as I started to relax, thinking she'd gone away, the door to my bedroom burst open with a crash that made me scream. The lock had given way. Em stood in the doorway, her long black hair hanging over her face. She was wearing a white nightgown and just staring at us, not moving, not speaking, just standing there, her body unnaturally still, her breathing so shallow I couldn't even see her chest moving. Marcus jumped up, placing himself between Em and me. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. Em didn't respond. She just stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then, without warning, she slammed the door shut with such force that a picture fell off my wall and shattered. We heard her footsteps receding down the hallway. Marcus and I looked at each other in shock and fear. He wanted to call the police, but I was worried about escalating the situation. Em was clearly having some kind of episode, and as someone who worked with mentally ill patients, I felt responsible for handling it properly. We cautiously opened the door and peered out. The hallway was empty, but there was something on the floor. A kitchen knife. It had fallen just outside my bedroom door, as if Em had been holding it behind her back. That was it. I couldn't risk my safety any longer. The next morning, while Em was sleeping, Marcus helped me pack some essentials, and we went to his apartment. From there, I called my landlord and explained the situation. He agreed to change the locks that day and have Em's belongings packed and moved to storage. I took a week off work and stayed with Marcus. My supervisor was understanding when I explained the situation, though I kept some of the creepier details to myself. She agreed to adjust the schedule so Em and I wouldn't be working the same shifts. Em called me repeatedly that week, leaving increasingly disturbing voicemails. At first, she was apologetic, claiming she had been sleepwalking. Then she became angry, accusing me of stealing her things. The final message was just breathing, followed by whispered words I couldn't understand. I thought that was the end of it. Em eventually stopped calling, and I moved back into my apartment after having the locks changed and installing a security system. I was jumpy for weeks, checking under my bed and in my closets every night. But gradually, things returned to normal. Then, about 3 months later, a colleague called me in a panic. Em had contacted her, rambling about needing to save a baby and saying everything must burn. My colleague was worried and asked if I knew where Em was living now. I didn't, but I suggested she alert the police if she thought Em might harm herself or others. 2 days later, I saw smoke from my kitchen window. There was a fire several blocks away. I didn't think anything of it until I saw the news that evening. Em had set fire to her own apartment. When neighbors tried to help her out, she fought them off and poured liquor on the flames to make them worse. By the time firefighters arrived, the entire floor was engulfed. Thankfully, everyone else in the building escaped. Em was arrested for aggravated arson. Because of her mental health history, she was sentenced to indefinite treatment at a psychiatric facility. Ironically, the same one where we'd both worked. I later learned from another colleague that Em had stopped taking her medication in the weeks before the fire. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear scratching at my door. I keep a baseball bat beside my bed now. I've considered moving, but this was my home before Em, and I refused to let her take that from me. I check the locks 3 times before going to bed every night, and sometimes, when I'm alone in the apartment, I swear I can smell smoke. Story 8. I still get goosebumps every time I think about what happened that day, even though it's been nearly 4 years now. I was just a 14-year-old freshman, trying to adjust to high school life and all that comes with it. Back then, my biggest concerns were making the basketball team and not looking like a total idiot in front of upperclassmen. But what happened that afternoon after practice changed everything for me. It was a Thursday in late October. The weather had just started to turn cold, and our coach had been drilling us hard since we were only a couple weeks away from our first game of the season. Me and my teammate Jack were totally exhausted after practice. We were both waiting for our older brothers to pick us up. They were seniors who had some student council meeting that ran late that day, while most of the other guys just hung around in the gym or went to the cafeteria to wait. Jack suggested we explore the school a bit. Our high school was this massive building that had been expanded like 5 different times over the years. The oldest section dated back to the 1950s, and there were all these rumors about hidden rooms and weird stuff from back when it was first built. "I'm so sick of just sitting around," Jack said, grabbing his backpack. "Let's check out that old wing past the library. I heard some juniors talking about how there's all sorts of weird stuff back there. I wasn't doing anything better, so I followed him. We walked through the main hallway, past the library, and into this section of the school that definitely looked older than the rest. The fluorescent lights buzzed a little louder here, and the floor tiles were this weird yellow-brown color instead of the blue and white in the newer sections. The hallways were pretty much deserted since it was almost 5 o'clock. Most after-school activities were wrapping up, and it felt strange walking through the empty corridors. Our footsteps echoed off the walls, and our voices seemed louder than normal. We turned down a hallway I'd never been through before. It wasn't on the way to any of my classes. The lockers here were smaller and painted a dull green color instead of the blue ones in the main hallways. It smelled different too, kind of musty and old, like my grandma's basement. "Dude, check this out," Jack said, stopping suddenly in front of a door tucked into a little alcove. It was different from the other classroom doors, darker wood with this small frosted glass window and a metal push bar. The weird thing was there was no sign on it. Every other door in the school had a room number or label. "What do you think it is?" I asked, trying to peek through the frosted glass, but I couldn't see anything clearly. "Only one way to find out," Jack said with that stupid grin he always got when he was about to do something we probably shouldn't. He pushed the door open, and it wasn't locked, which surprised me. Behind the door was a staircase leading down. It wasn't like the main staircases in the school that were wide and well lit. This was narrow, concrete, and had just a couple of dim lights along the wall. The stairs turned at a landing and continued down into darkness. "I didn't even know the school had a basement," I said, feeling a sudden nervousness creeping up my spine. "Me neither," Jack replied, his voice quieter now. "Want to check it out?" Part of me wanted to say no. I had this feeling in my gut that was telling me to just close the door and go back to the gym. But you know how it is when you're 14 and your friend is right there. The last thing you want to do is look scared. So I just shrugged and said, "Yeah, sure." Jack pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. I did the same, and we started down the stairs. The temperature dropped noticeably with each step. By the time we reached the bottom, I could see my breath in the air in front of my phone's light. The basement didn't look anything like I expected. Instead of a big open space with pipes and machinery, there was a single hallway with a low ceiling. The walls were painted this dingy, off-white color that had yellowed with age, and the floor was bare concrete. Fluorescent lights were spaced along the ceiling, but only about half of them worked, creating these alternating pools of light and shadow. "This is weird," I whispered, not sure why I was keeping my voice down. "Why would they need a basement like this?" Jack shined his light down the hallway. "Look, there are doors. Let's see what's in them." The hallway had maybe 5 or 6 doors along it, all painted the same faded green color as the lockers upstairs. They had these little metal number plates, B1, B2, B3, and so on. We approached the first door, B1. Jack tried the handle, but it was locked. Same with B2. When we got to B3, though, the handle turned. "Should we?" Jack asked, his hand on the doorknob. I hesitated. "I don't know, man. What if we get in trouble? We probably shouldn't be down here." "Who's gonna know? Everyone's gone for the day except for a few teachers. Come on, aren't you curious?" Before I could answer, Jack pushed the door open. We both aimed our phone flashlights inside, revealing a small room filled with old desks and chairs stacked against the walls. There were a few filing cabinets and some ancient-looking AV equipment, the kind of stuff teachers probably used decades ago. "Just storage," Jack said, sounding disappointed. He closed the door and we continued down the hallway. B4 was locked, but B5 was open. This room was different, completely empty except for a single desk in the center and what looked like an old film projector on a cart. The walls were bare concrete, not painted like the hallway. Something about that room made my skin crawl. "This is kind of creepy," I said, stepping back into the hallway. "Why would they have a room with just one desk?" Jack shrugged. "Who knows? Old schools are full of weird stuff." We kept going, reaching the end of the hallway where there was one final door. This one was different. It was metal instead of wood, painted black, and had no number on it. Just a blank metal door at the end of the hall. That's when it happened. As we stood there debating whether to try opening the mysterious door, it started to open from the inside. My heart literally stopped for a second. We hadn't heard any sounds coming from behind it, no indication anyone else was down there with us. The door swung open slowly, and a man stepped out. He wasn't very tall, maybe 5'9" or so, with short brown hair cut close to his scalp. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. The thing that immediately struck me was that he definitely wasn't a teacher or janitor or anyone I'd ever seen at school before. When he saw us, he stopped dead in his tracks. For what felt like forever, we just stared at each other. My mind was racing, trying to figure out who this guy could be and why he was in a basement I didn't even know existed until 15 minutes ago. His expression changed from surprise to something else, something that made my stomach twist into knots. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more calculating, like he was figuring something out. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "Hey there, boys," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the narrow hallway. "What are you doing down here?" Neither of us answered. I was frozen in place, and I could feel Jack tensing up beside me. The man took a step forward. "You shouldn't be down here. This area is restricted." Another step. "Why don't you come over here and tell me who let you down here?" That's when he started walking directly toward us, his pace picking up. "Come here," he said more firmly. "Right now." Something in his tone, the way his hands were slightly extended toward us, the fact that he was a stranger in a locked part of the school that nobody seemed to know about. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. Jack grabbed my arm. "Run," he whispered. We turned and bolted back down the hallway toward the stairs. I could hear the man's footsteps behind us picking up speed. "Hey, stop! Come back here!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We reached the stairs and took them two at a time. I stumbled on one step, nearly falling, but Jack grabbed my arm and yanked me up. "Come here, boys! I just want to talk to you!" The man's voice was closer now, and I didn't dare look back. We burst through the door at the top of the stairs, back into the school hallway. Without even thinking about it, we slammed the door shut behind us. "Keep running," Jack gasped, and we sprinted down the hallway, past the old lockers, and didn't stop until we reached the main corridor where a few students were still hanging around. We collapsed against some lockers, both of us breathing hard. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. "What the hell was that?" Jack panted, his face pale. "I don't know," I said, trying to catch my breath, "but that guy definitely wasn't supposed to be there." We sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. Part of me thought maybe we had overreacted. Maybe he was some kind of maintenance worker or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't right. The way he looked at us, the way he moved toward us, something was very wrong. After we caught our breath, Jack looked at me. Should we tell someone? I thought about it. Who would believe us? We weren't supposed to be down there in the first place. We should at least check if he followed us, Jack said. Reluctantly, I agreed. We walked back to the hallway with the green lockers, staying close together. The door to the basement was closed, just as we'd left it. Jack reached for the handle and tried to turn it. It was locked. It wasn't locked before, I whispered. We looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. Jack tried the handle again, twisting it harder this time, but it wouldn't budge. Let's get out of here, I said. We practically ran back to the main part of the school. When we got there, our brothers were already waiting for us in the lobby, looking annoyed. Where the hell have you guys been? Jack's brother demanded. We've been waiting for like 20 minutes. On the drive home, we didn't tell them what happened. I don't think they would have believed us anyway. They would have just thought we were making up stories. The next day at school, Jack and I went back to that hallway during lunch. The door to the basement was still there, still locked. We tried again after school, same thing. We never found that door unlocked again. We eventually told one of our teachers about finding a basement, not mentioning the man. She looked at us like we were crazy and said the school didn't have a basement, just a crawl space for maintenance that was staff access only. When we tried to show her the door, she just laughed and said that was probably a janitor's closet or electrical room. But I know what we saw. That wasn't a janitor's closet. That was a full basement with a hallway and rooms. And that man wasn't a janitor or a teacher. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he was doing down there. Sometimes I still have nightmares about what might have happened if we hadn't run when we did. If we had listened to him and gone toward him instead of running away. I've never gone exploring in any abandoned parts of buildings since then, and I always trust that feeling in my gut that tells me when something isn't right. I don't know if anyone else has ever found that basement or seen that man. All I know is that Jack and I were lucky to get out of there when we did. Story 9. I still don't know why it happened to me. I've gone over that day 1,000 times in my head, trying to figure out if I'd offended someone or if there was any reason someone would target me specifically. There wasn't. I was just a regular guy who went to a baseball game with his buddy, and somehow I became someone's prey. This happened last summer. I live in Ridgefield, and the Major League Baseball stadium is only about 30 minutes from my place. My friend Sean scored some decent tickets through his work. Not the best seats, but good enough to see the action without binoculars. We'd been planning this for weeks since our team was having a killer season. The day was perfect for baseball. Not too hot, clear skies, just enough of a breeze to keep comfortable. We got to the stadium about an hour before the first pitch, grabbed some beers and nachos, and found our seats along the first base line, about 20 rows up. The place was packed, which wasn't surprising for a Saturday game in the middle of summer. The first 6 innings were completely normal. Our team was down by 2, but they'd been making a comeback, and the crowd was getting pretty hyped up. Sean and I were just shooting the shit, talking about work drama, making bets on which plays would happen next. Normal stuff. I remember feeling relaxed, just enjoying being out after a stressful week. Then the 7th inning stretch came. Everyone stood up for "Take me out to the ball game," and I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I pulled it out thinking it might be my girlfriend checking in, but instead it was an airdrop request from iPhone. No name attached, just "iPhone would like to share a photo." I don't know why I accepted it. I guess I figured it was someone I knew messing around. Maybe Sean had taken a stupid picture of me without me noticing. That happens sometimes when we hang out. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a photo of me, like right then, at that moment. I was wearing my team's cap and navy blue t-shirt, holding my beer in one hand and my phone in the other. It was zoomed in on just me, as if someone had taken the picture with a telephoto lens from somewhere else in the stadium. The quality was good, not some grainy, distant shot. You could see the details on my face clearly. "Dude, check this out," I said, showing Sean my phone. "Someone just airdropped me a picture of myself." Sean laughed at first. "That's weird. Who do you think it is? Jake, maybe?" Jake was another friend who knew we were at the game, but he'd said he couldn't make it. "I don't think so," I said, starting to scan the crowd. "This looks like it was taken from up there." I pointed to the upper deck near the third baseline, across the stadium from us. I stared up there for a minute, but there were thousands of people. Finding someone looking back was impossible. The 8th inning started, and I tried to focus back on the game, but I kept glancing around, feeling weird about the whole thing. About 15 minutes later, my phone vibrated again. Another airdrop request from iPhone. Against my better judgment, I accepted it. This time, it was another picture of me, taken from a different angle, but still clearly from that day. I was mid-laugh, looking at Sean. But what made my blood run cold was that someone had digitally drawn a bright red X across my face. Not like a cutesy filter or anything. It looked aggressive, like someone had slashed across my face with digital red paint. "Sean," I said, my voice shaking a little. "They sent another one." I showed him, and this time he didn't laugh. "That's fucked up," he said, taking the phone from me to look closer. "Someone's messing with you." I turned around in my seat, scanning the rows behind us. Nothing but normal fans watching the game. I looked up toward the upper decks again. Who the hell was watching me, and why? "Should we report it to security?" I asked. Sean hesitated. "For what? Someone sending weird pictures? They'll probably just laugh it off. Let's just ignore it. Probably some loser trying to freak people out for fun." I tried to take his advice, but I couldn't focus on the game anymore. My eyes kept darting around the crowd, trying to spot anyone who seemed to be paying special attention to me instead of the field. The stadium suddenly felt oppressive, like all those thousands of people were just cover for whoever was stalking me. In the 9th inning, with our team now down by just one run and everyone on their feet cheering, my phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't a photo, but a video. My hands were shaking as I opened it. It was a 20-second clip of me and Sean, filmed from what looked like maybe 20 feet directly behind us in our same section. The video showed me putting my phone in my pocket, turning to say something to Sean, taking a sip of beer, all things I'd done just a few minutes earlier. I whipped around, staring at the people behind us, but everyone looked absorbed in the game's tense final moments. "Sean," I whispered, showing him the video. "They're right fucking behind us somewhere." Sean's face went serious. He stood up and scanned the crowd behind us more carefully than I had, but then just shook his head. "There's too many people. Could be anyone." "Let's just go," I said. "I don't want to be here anymore." Sean nodded. "Yeah, okay. Let's bail." We left before the game ended, pushing our way through the crowded aisles while everyone else was still focused on the final plays. I kept looking over my shoulder, trying to spot anyone following us, but the concourse was packed with people heading to bathrooms or concession stands before the game ended. We made it to the parking garage without incident, and I started to breathe a little easier. Sean had parked on the 4th level, and the garage was relatively empty since most people were still at the game. We got in his car, and I leaned back in the seat, feeling drained. That was really weird, I said, closing my eyes for a second. What kind of sicko gets off on freaking strangers out? My phone vibrated. I didn't want to look at it, but I did. Another airdrop request. My hand was trembling as I accepted it. It wasn't a picture this time. It was a text note. Marcus Delgado, 1742 Oak Ridge Lane, Ridgefield. I will get you. My full name, my fucking home address, and a threat. Sean, I choked out, showing him the screen. They know where I live. Sean grabbed my phone and stared at it, his face going pale. Holy shit, we need to call the cops. Then we both froze as we realized something. For someone to airdrop anything to me, they had to be within Bluetooth range, maybe 100 feet max. They were in the parking garage with us. Start the car, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Now. Sean fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking as badly as mine. We both scanned the dimly lit garage, but all I could see were rows of empty cars. The engine finally started, and Sean threw the car into reverse. As we backed out of the space, headlights suddenly flashed on 3 rows away. A black sedan with heavily tinted windows. It peeled out of its space with a screech of tires. "That's them," I shouted. "Follow them." "Are you insane?" Sean yelled back, but he was already pulling toward the exit ramp. "We need to get the plate number at least." We sped down the ramp, but the black car was already disappearing down to the next level. By the time we reached the garage exit, we caught just a glimpse of it turning right onto the main road, tires squealing again. Sean pulled over once we were a few blocks away. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I called the police. They took a report, but without a license plate or description of the driver, they didn't have much to go on. They said they'd increase patrols near my house for a few days, but I could tell they weren't taking it that seriously. Just another case of harassment at a sporting event. I stayed at Sean's place that night, and the night after. I couldn't bear the thought of going back to my apartment alone, knowing that someone out there had my address and had specifically targeted me. I ended up installing a security system, changing my phone number, and even temporarily deactivating all my social media accounts. I was paranoid for weeks, jumping at every notification, staring at strangers on the street, wondering if they were the one. The worst part is not knowing why. Why me? Was it completely random? Did I accidentally cut someone off in traffic one day? Did I unknowingly offend someone? Or was it just some sick game to them? Pick a random person and terrorize them. It's been almost a year now, and nothing else has happened. No more strange messages, no break-in attempts at my place. But I still find myself scanning crowds whenever I'm in public, looking for someone watching me too intently. I haven't been back to the stadium. I probably never will. Sometimes I wish they had done something more concrete, something that would have forced the police to take it more seriously. But then I remind myself that's crazy talk. I should be grateful it didn't escalate beyond threats. But the not knowing is what still keeps me up at night. Who were they? What did they want? And are they still out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment? I've never felt safe in public since that day. I always keep my airdrop turned off now, and I still check my locks 3 times before I go to bed. Because somewhere out there is someone who knows my name, knows where I live, and for some reason decided I was their target. And I have no idea why. Story 10. I'm still not sure how to explain what happened to me last Halloween, but I need to get this off my chest. I've been looking over my shoulder for months now, and maybe writing this all down will help me process it. I was a junior at Westfield University last fall. Halloween fell on a Saturday, which meant everyone was going all out with parties. My buddy Jake had invited me to this costume thing at his frat house. Nothing too wild, just the usual college stuff. I went as a zombie baseball player, just took my old high school uniform, tore it up a bit, and smeared some fake blood on my face. Pretty low effort, I know. The party was decent enough. I had a few beers, not enough to be drunk, just a slight buzz. Hung out with friends, met a few new people. Nothing unusual happened there, which is what makes everything that followed so much weirder. Around 1 in the morning, I decided to head home. My apartment was about 15 minutes from campus, in this quiet neighborhood where a lot of grad students and young professionals lived. I remember checking my phone as I got into my car. It was exactly 1:05. The streets were practically empty as I pulled away from the row of houses where most of the parties were happening. I first noticed the car about 3 minutes into my drive. It was maybe 4 or 5 car lengths behind me, headlights on bright, which was annoying because they were shining right into my rearview mirror. I didn't think much of it at first, probably just another student heading home from a party. But then I made a right turn at the next intersection, and so did the car. Still, not that weird. There were only a few main roads out of the campus area. A minute later, I made a left toward my neighborhood. The car followed. That's when I started paying more attention. It was a dark sedan. Couldn't tell the make or model in the darkness. It stayed the same distance behind me for a while, but then began to close the gap. Within a minute or two, it was practically riding my bumper. My heart rate picked up. I'm not usually paranoid, but something felt off. I decided to test if they were actually following me by making a random turn onto a side street I never use. Sure enough, the car followed, still right on my tail. Now I was genuinely concerned. I didn't want to lead whoever this was to my apartment. What if they were targeting me specifically? What if it was some drunk idiot looking for trouble? My palms started sweating on the steering wheel. I made a couple more turns, hoping they'd give up, but the car stayed with me, sometimes dropping back a bit before surging forward again. At one point, they got so close I could see the outline of their headlights filling my entire rearview mirror. I tried to remember self-defense advice I'd heard before. Drive to a police station if you're being followed. But it was late, and the nearest station was on the other side of town. I wasn't even sure if it would be staffed at this hour. My next thought was to find a public place with people around. But at 1 in the morning in our sleepy college town, there weren't many options. I made a split-second decision to turn onto Ridgeway Road, which runs alongside Westfield Memorial Park. It's this long, straight road with dense trees on one side and the park on the other. During the day, it's beautiful. At night, it's creepy as hell. No streetlights, just darkness, with a few houses spaced far apart. My thinking was that if I could get some speed on this straight stretch, maybe I could put enough distance between us to turn off somewhere and lose them. But as soon as I made the turn, I knew I'd made a mistake. The road was more isolated than I remembered, and now I was essentially trapped on this long stretch with nowhere to turn off for at least a mile. The car behind me accelerated hard, closing the gap between us in seconds. My heart was pounding in my chest now. I pushed my old Honda to go faster, but it was no match for whatever they were driving. 60 miles per hour became 70, then nearly 80 on this dark, narrow road. Then something happened that still gives me nightmares. The car behind me swerved out suddenly and began to pull alongside me on the left. I caught a glimpse of the driver through their window, and I froze for a split second. It was a grim reaper, a full-on hooded black robe with a bone-white mask where the face should be. Not some cheap Halloween costume either. This looked high quality, genuinely terrifying. just a black void with that pale, expressionless face turned directly toward me as they drove. In that moment, I knew this wasn't some random road rage incident or a drunk college kid. This person had deliberately targeted me. Maybe they'd seen me at the party. Maybe they'd been waiting outside. I don't know, but they were trying to run me off the road. As they pulled even with my car, they began to swerve toward me, trying to force me onto the shoulder. My tires hit the gravel at the edge of the pavement, and I felt my car start to fishtail. I was going to crash if I didn't do something immediately. Pure instinct took over. I slammed on my brakes as hard as I could. My car screeched and shuddered, the seatbelt cutting into my chest. The Reaper's car shot forward past me, clearly not expecting my sudden stop. What happened next is still vivid in my mind. Their car swerved violently, tires squealing as they tried to regain control. They overcorrected, veering sharply to the left, then right, before spinning completely around. It was like watching a horror movie in slow motion as their car careened off the road and crashed into the drainage ditch running along the park side of the road. I had stopped my car by this point, my breath coming in short gasps. For a moment, there was complete silence except for the sound of my engine idling and my heart hammering in my ears. The other car's headlights were pointing at an odd angle, partly illuminating the trees beyond the ditch. Should I drive away? Call for help? I sat frozen, unsure what to do. I thought about the driver. Were they hurt? Despite everything, some part of me felt responsible. But then I remembered that this person had been trying to run me off the road just seconds earlier. Before I could decide, the driver's door of the crashed car slowly opened. A dark figure emerged, unsteady at first, then straightening up. The Grim Reaper costume was unmistakable in the dim light, the hood still up, the mask still in place. They stood there beside their car for a moment, then turned their head directly toward me. I'll never forget that moment. This figure in black, standing in the darkness, staring at me. Then they took a step forward, and another. They were walking toward my car. That broke my paralysis. I slammed my car into drive and floored it, tires spinning on the pavement before finding grip. I didn't look back until I'd gone at least a mile. My rearview mirror showed only darkness behind me, no headlights following, no sign of the Reaper. I took a completely roundabout way home, constantly checking to make sure I wasn't being followed again. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, I sat in my car for several minutes, trying to calm my racing heart. I checked all around the parking lot before finally making a dash for my apartment. Once inside, I locked the door, then checked all the windows and the balcony door too. My roommate was staying at his girlfriend's that night, so I was alone, jumping at every little sound. I pulled the blinds closed and sat on the couch, still in my zombie baseball costume, trying to process what had just happened. After about 20 minutes of this, I called the police. The dispatcher took my information and said they'd send someone to check out the crash site and then come talk to me. An officer arrived at my apartment about 45 minutes later. I told him everything: the following, the chase, the crash, the Grim Reaper costume. He took notes and seemed to take me seriously, which was a relief. He told me they'd already sent a patrol car to Ridgeway Road, but asked me to be specific about where the crash had occurred. We found skid marks on the road and signs that a vehicle went into the ditch at the location you described, he explained. But there was no car there when our officers arrived. I remember feeling a chill run through me at his words. "That's impossible," I said. "The front end was smashed. There's no way they could have driven that car out of there." The officer nodded. "We thought the same thing. We're going to look into it more in the daylight. But here's something interesting. We ran your plate, and there was a report of a dark sedan stolen from the university parking lot earlier tonight. Could be related. He took down more information and told me they'd follow up. Before leaving, he advised me to be vigilant over the next few days, just in case. I didn't sleep at all that night, or much the next few nights either. The police called 2 days later to tell me they'd found the stolen car abandoned about 5 miles from the crash site. It had front-end damage consistent with going into a ditch, but there was no sign of the driver and no useful fingerprints or evidence inside. They never found out who was driving that car or why they targeted me. I've gone over that night 1,000 times in my head, trying to figure out if I knew someone who might have done this as a prank, or if I'd somehow made an enemy without realizing it. Nothing makes sense. The worst part is that they saw my license plate. They know what I drive. Sometimes when I'm walking to my car in the parking lot, I'll see a dark sedan and freeze in my tracks. I've changed my routes home. I vary my schedule. I'm constantly checking my mirrors when I drive. Halloween is coming up again soon, and I find myself dreading it. Will they be out there again? Was this some kind of sick Halloween game to them? I don't know. But every time I see someone in a black hoodie or catch a glimpse of a white mask in a store display, my heart starts racing all over again. I still don't have an explanation for what happened that night. Who was behind that mask? What did they want from me? And how did they manage to get that wrecked car 5 miles away before the police arrived? These questions keep me up at night, even months later. I just want to understand why I was hunted like that, and if I need to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. Story 11. I've kept this to myself for so long. It feels strange to finally type it out, but I need to get this off my chest now that they've finally torn down the Horizon Mall. Maybe writing this will help me process what happened, or maybe someone else out there knows something I don't. Growing up in my hometown, Horizon Mall was my absolute favorite place in the world. I was probably around 7 or 8 when my parents would take me there on weekends. It wasn't just a mall to me. It was this massive gleaming palace of endless possibilities. 4 stories tall with this huge open center that went all the way up to a massive skylight. You could stand on any floor and look all the way down or up through this giant column of open space. Each floor had these chest-high glass barriers with metal railings to keep people from falling, but you could still see everything happening on every level. The layout was burned into my brain from all our visits. Ground floor had this amazing food court with at least 20 different restaurants. I always begged for the cinnamon pretzels from this one place near the center. The second floor was kid heaven. Toys, electronics, video games. I'd spend hours at the Nintendo display kiosk playing Mario while my mom shopped. Third floor had all the clothing stores, including my dad's menswear shop, Kingsley Formal, which he ran with his business partner. The top floor was mostly boring office space, insurance companies, the mall management offices, that kind of stuff. What I remember most was how alive that place felt. The echoing sounds bouncing off all the hard surfaces, conversations and footsteps and music from different stores, all mixing together in this constant hum. The smell of those pretzels and chlorine from the decorative fountains. The cool air conditioning that hit you as soon as you walked through the entrance. It was magical to me. Then one day, when I was 9, it just closed. No warning, no explanation. Just a sign on the door saying permanently closed with some corporate logo I didn't recognize. I was devastated. My dad seemed stressed about it, but wouldn't tell me why. He just said he was looking for a new location for his store. Whenever I asked about the mall, my parents would exchange this weird look and change the subject. That was 15 years ago. I eventually stopped asking. Life moved on. Last month, I moved back home temporarily after finishing college. The local news was covering the demolition of Horizon Mall, which had sat abandoned all these years. Something about the footage of those wrecking balls hitting the building made me bring it up again at dinner. Why did they really close that place down? I asked, expecting the usual deflection. My mom put her fork down and looked at my dad. Some silent conversation passed between them, and he nodded slightly. "You're old enough now," she said quietly. "It's not something we talk about here. You know how things are." I did know. In our country, tragedy is something you bury, not discuss. Bad events are seen as contagious. Speaking about them invites more misfortune. It's deeply cultural, almost superstitious, but everyone follows it. When bad things happen, they're wrapped in euphemisms and vague references, if mentioned at all. Mom took a deep breath. "I was there the night it happened." She explained that my dad's store had been hosting an after-hours event for a new line of Italian suits. It was a hot summer evening, and the air conditioning in their shop was acting up. The event was running late, around 10:30 or 11 at night. The rest of the mall was closed and dark, but they had special permission to keep the third floor accessible for their clients. It was stuffy in the store, Mom said. Too many people in suits drinking champagne. I stepped out to get some air. She walked to the railing overlooking the central opening. The mall was eerily quiet. No music, no crowds, just the distant hum of the few lights left on for security. Most of the building was dark shadows, with just the third floor and a few emergency lights illuminated. I was just standing there, looking down at the food court, she continued. I remember thinking how strange it looked in the dark, all those tables empty. Then I heard something. She couldn't place the sound at first, a rustling like fabric moving through air. She looked up toward the sound, toward the fourth floor. "That's when I saw him," she said, her voice getting quieter. "A man in a brown business suit. He was falling." Mom said the strangest part was the silence. He didn't scream or shout. He just fell, arms slightly out like he was suspended in slow motion. She froze, couldn't move, couldn't even blink as she watched him plummet past her floor down towards the ground. "There was a sound when she trailed off. "The human body isn't meant to hit marble from that height." Dad reached over and took her hand. "Your mother came running back into the store. She was white as a sheet, couldn't speak, just pointed. By the time I got out there, people from the event were already at the railing, looking down. Someone was calling for help on their cell phone. The mall was closed immediately. Police tape went up. But within days, it became clear the mall would never reopen. The damage was too extensive, too comprehensive. As my mother put it, what remains spreads out so far and wide that it's easier to close down a mall forever than try to clean it all away. The man who fell was Mr. Darian Hoskins, the owner of the mall himself. He owned the management company that operated from the fourth floor. According to the minimal reporting that followed, he had been dealing with severe financial problems. The mall had been losing tenants for months, and his company was on the verge of bankruptcy. But why was he even there at night when the mall was closed? I asked. My parents exchanged another look. "That's the question, isn't it?" Dad said. "Officially, it was ruled an accident. He was working late, went to check something near the railing, and somehow fell over." "Over a chest-high barrier?" I asked. Mom nodded slowly. "The barriers were secure. I leaned against them all the time. They didn't give way." "Then how—" "We don't talk about it," Dad cut in firmly. "You know how things are here." But I couldn't let it go. Over the next few days, I started digging. Old newspaper archives had barely any information, just the basic facts, heavily sanitized. The mall closed due to structural concerns. Mr. Hoskins passed away suddenly. No details, no follow-up stories. Just quiet erasure, as is our custom with tragedy. I finally tracked down Mr. Kapoor, my dad's old business partner. He retired years ago and moved to the countryside. When I called and mentioned the mall, there was a long silence. "Why dig this up now?" he finally asked. "They're demolishing it," I said. "I need to understand." He sighed heavily. "Your father and I lost everything when that place closed. Insurance barely covered anything. We signed NDAs as part of the settlement." "NDAs? For what?" Another pause. "To not discuss the circumstances." I pressed him, but he wouldn't say more about that night. Instead, he told me something else, something about the weeks before. Hoskins was desperate, he said. The mall was his life's work, but it was failing. The economy was bad, and a new shopping center had opened across town. He started making deals with, let's call them, unscrupulous investors. According to Mr. Kapoor, Hoskins had borrowed money from people you don't borrow from in our country, people who don't use courts to settle debts. In the weeks before his death, Hoskins had become paranoid, installing extra security cameras, changing his routes home. "The night it happened," Mr. Kapoor said, "the security cameras on the 4th floor were disabled for maintenance. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" "Are you suggesting he was—" "I'm not suggesting anything," he cut me off. "I'm just telling you what I know. Maybe he jumped because of the pressure. Maybe it was an accident, or maybe he wasn't alone up there. But in our country, we don't ask these questions, do we? We clean up, move on, and pretend nothing happened. Yesterday, I drove by the demolition site. The once Grand Horizon Mall was now just concrete rubble and twisted metal. A construction worker was taking a break near my car, so I asked him if they'd found anything interesting during the demolition. He shrugged. Just the usual. Old store signs, some forgotten inventory. As he turned to go back to work, he paused. Though there was one weird thing. When we broke through to the management offices on the top floor, we found all these old security tapes labeled for the night the place closed. Weird thing is, they were all blank, like someone recorded over them. I felt a chill run through me. The cameras were supposedly down for maintenance that night. The worker raised an eyebrow. That's the thing. If they were down for maintenance, why would there be tapes at all? Down means not recording, right? I couldn't sleep last night, thinking about what really happened at Horizon Mall. Was Hoskins truly alone that night? Did he jump, or did someone help him over that railing? In a culture where we can't even speak directly about death, how can we ever confront murder? All I know is that somewhere in the rubble of that demolished building lies the truth about the man who fell from the sky. And like the body that hit the marble floor with such force that an entire mall had to be closed forever, that truth has been shattered into pieces too numerous and too widespread to ever fully clean up. Some days, I think I can still hear the sound my mother couldn't describe, the sound of secrets hitting the ground from a very great height. Story 12. I never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural before all this happened. I'm a pretty rational person. I work in accounting, for God's sake. But what my husband Mark and I experienced last summer at Silver Lake still keeps me up at night. We've been renting the same cabin every summer for 5 years now. It's nothing fancy, just a small 2-bedroom place with a deck that looks out over the water. The lake is pretty secluded, with only a handful of other cabins scattered along the shoreline. We love it there because it's quiet, and we can disconnect from our busy lives in the city. From our deck, we could always see this abandoned property across the lake. It looked like some kind of old camp with several buildings partially hidden by overgrown trees. For years, we'd sit on our deck with coffee in the mornings, wondering about that place. Mark would make up stories about it. Maybe it was an old summer camp that went bankrupt, or a retreat center that got abandoned when the owners died. We never really knew. Last summer, we finally decided to check it out. It was a Tuesday morning, perfectly clear and not too hot. We'd brought our canoe with us this year, so we figured it would be a fun little adventure. My father-in-law, Bob, was staying with us that week too, but he wanted to fish off the dock instead of joining our exploration. "Just be back for lunch," he told us as we pushed off from shore. "And take your phone in case you need help." I remember rolling my eyes a bit. Bob always treated us like we were teenagers, not a married couple in our 30s. The lake was completely still that morning. Our canoe barely made a ripple as we paddled across. It took us about 20 minutes to reach the other side, and as we got closer, I started feeling, I don't know, uneasy. The buildings looked much worse up close. What had seemed charmingly rustic from a distance was actually just decaying and gross. We pulled the canoe up onto a small rocky beach area. There was an old, rotted wooden dock nearby that had mostly collapsed into the water. A narrow dirt path led up from the shore toward the buildings, which were set back maybe 50 yards from the water. The whole place was choked with weeds and saplings. Nature was definitely reclaiming this spot. "This must have been a girls' camp," Mark said, pointing to a weathered wooden sign half hidden in the weeds. I could just make out faded lettering. "Camp Silverwood, Esther 1952. Below that was a faded painting of pine trees and what looked like girls in old-fashioned uniforms. The main building was a large two-story structure with peeling white paint and green trim. Most of the windows were broken, and the porch steps were completely rotted through. Several smaller cabins were scattered behind it, all in similar states of disrepair. The whole place had this heavy feeling of abandonment, not just empty, but forgotten. "Should we go inside?" Mark asked, already heading toward the main building. I hesitated. Something about the place made me nervous, but I didn't want Mark to think I was being ridiculous. "I guess," I said, following him. "But let's be careful. The floors might not be safe." We had to climb through a window since the front steps were too damaged to use. Inside, it was exactly what you'd expect from a building that had been abandoned for years. Dust everywhere, water stains on the walls, and that musty smell of mold and decay. We were in what must have been the dining hall. Long tables were still arranged in neat rows, though they were covered in debris and animal droppings. Mark was in his element, taking pictures with his phone and examining everything like he was on some archaeological expedition. "This place must have closed down in the 80s or 90s, he said, pointing to a faded calendar still hanging on one wall. I couldn't make out the year, but the pictures were definitely from that era. We moved deeper into the building, finding a kitchen area with ancient appliances and cabinets hanging off their hinges. Everything was coated in a thick layer of dust and grime. Surprisingly, there wasn't much graffiti or evidence that local teens used the place to party. It really did feel untouched, like everyone had just up and left one day. As we explored further, the feeling that we shouldn't be there got stronger. The air felt thick and oppressive, almost like it was hard to breathe. I told myself it was just the dust and mold, but deep down, I knew it was something else. We found a hallway leading to what seemed to be administrative offices. Old papers were scattered everywhere, most of them too water-damaged to read. In one room, there was a wall of photographs showing groups of smiling girls and counselors from different years. The most recent ones seemed to be from the early 90s. "I wonder why they shut down," I said, studying the photos. The girls looked happy enough. Mark was about to answer when we heard it. A distinct footstep from the floor above us. Not like an animal scurrying around, a human footstep, heavy and deliberate. We both froze. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Mark nodded, his eyes wide. We stood completely still, listening. Another step, then another. Whoever was up there was walking slowly across the floor, directly above our heads. "Maybe it's another explorer," Mark suggested, but his voice was tight with tension. I was about to suggest we call out when the footsteps suddenly quickened. Within seconds, they transformed from a casual walk to what sounded like someone running fast and hard across the entire length of the upper floor. The ceiling creaked and dust rained down on us. They weren't just running. They were running toward the stairs, toward us. We didn't even discuss it. Pure instinct took over, and we both sprinted for the exit. The front door was closer than the window we'd climbed through, so Mark yanked it open and we burst out onto the sagging front porch. I heard wood cracking beneath our feet, but we didn't slow down. Instead of heading straight back to the canoe, which would have left us exposed on the open beach, we ran for the tree line about 30 feet to the side of the building. We ducked behind some thick bushes, hearts pounding, trying to control our breathing. From our hiding spot, we could see the front of the building. The door we'd just escaped through was still open. As we watched, frozen with fear, something stepped out onto the porch. I couldn't see it clearly. It was like my eyes couldn't quite focus on it, like looking through water. But it was big, adult-sized, and it moved in a way that made my skin crawl. Not quite right. It stood there for what felt like forever, as if scanning the area, looking for us. Finally, it went back inside. The door remained open. "We need to get out of here," I whispered to Mark. "But not back to the canoe. Not yet." He nodded, and we began making our way through the woods, staying parallel to the shoreline but out of sight from the camp. It took us nearly an hour to circle back to our cabin, scratched up from pushing through undergrowth and trembling from adrenaline. Bob was sitting on the dock when we emerged from the woods. He looked surprised to see us coming from that direction. "Where's the canoe?" he asked. We explained what had happened, though I could tell he didn't really believe us. He kept asking if we were sure it wasn't just another hiker, or maybe someone living there illegally. "You can't leave the canoe there," he insisted. "Those things aren't cheap, and what if it floats away? You need to go back and get it." I was ready to write off the canoe as a loss, but Mark agreed with his dad. "We'll go back, but not alone," he said. "You're coming with us, Dad." So that's how, 4 hours later, the three of us found ourselves heading back to Camp Silverwood, this time in Bob's larger fishing boat. It was late afternoon by then, and the sun was already starting to dip toward the horizon. The abandoned camp looked even more menacing in the fading light. "I don't see why we all needed to come," Bob grumbled as we approached the shore. "There's nobody living in these old buildings." Mark and I exchanged glances, but said nothing. We pulled up to the shore, and sure enough, our canoe was still there, exactly where we'd left it. Bob stayed with the boat, while Mark and I went to retrieve the canoe. As we dragged it toward the water, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder at the main building looming behind us. "Wait," Mark said suddenly. "I want to check something." Before I could stop him, he was heading back toward the building. I followed, reluctantly, with Bob calling after us in confusion. Mark didn't go inside this time. Instead, he circled around to where we could see the upper floor windows. "I want to know what was up there," he explained. Most of the windows were broken, or so dirty you couldn't see inside. But one window at the end was relatively intact, and if we stood at the right angle, we could just make out part of the upper hallway. There were footprints in the thick dust on the floor. Large, distinct footprints that didn't match either of ours. They crossed the visible part of the hallway and disappeared from view. "See?" Mark said, his voice barely audible. "Someone was here." As we stood there, I heard a branch snap in the woods behind us. We both whirled around, but there was nothing visible among the trees. "Let's go," I said, pulling at Mark's arm. "Now." We hurried back to where Bob was waiting impatiently. Together we secured the canoe to the back of the fishing boat and pushed off from shore. The whole time I kept looking back at the camp, half expecting to see something watching us from one of the windows. As we motored away, I swear the temperature around us dropped by 10 degrees, even though it was August. Mark must have felt it too, because he put his arm around me and pulled me close. That night I couldn't sleep. Our bedroom faced the lake, and I kept imagining that whatever had chased us was watching our cabin from across the water. I got up several times to check that all the doors and windows were locked. The next morning at breakfast, Bob acted like nothing had happened. He wanted to go fishing again, business as usual. Mark seemed eager to move on too, talking about hiking trails we could explore on our side of the lake. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd disturbed something at that camp, something that was now aware of us. For the rest of our vacation, I refused to go out on the lake. I couldn't even sit on the deck without feeling like I was being watched from across the water. On our last night there, I woke up around 3 in the morning to use the bathroom. As I passed by the living room window, I glanced out at the lake. The moon was bright enough that I could just make out the outline of the camp buildings on the far shore, and there, at the edge of the water, was a figure, just standing there, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. Maybe it was never there at all. But I know what we experienced in that abandoned camp was real. Something was in that building with us, something that didn't want us there. We haven't gone back to Silver Lake since then. Mark says it's because we found a better cabin rental elsewhere, but I know the real reason. Whatever was in Camp Silverwood is still there, watching and waiting. And I have no intention of ever going back to find out what it is. Story 13. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. It's been almost a year, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I'm not even sure if posting this is a good idea, but I need to get it off my chest because it's been eating away at me. I keep wondering if anyone else has experienced something similar. After graduating college last year, I found myself in a bit of a housing dilemma. I'd accepted a job in Oak Ridge City, decent pay, good career prospects, but I didn't know anyone there. The rental market was brutal, and my entry-level salary wasn't going to get me much on my own. That's when I remembered Vanessa Harding was also moving there. We weren't close in high school, just acquaintances who shared a few classes and mutual friends. But we'd kept in loose contact through social media. When I saw her post about looking for a roommate in Oak Ridge, it felt like perfect timing. We messaged back and forth, and everything seemed to align. She'd found a small 2-bedroom house with reasonable rent, had already signed the lease, and just needed someone to take the second room. I was desperate enough not to overthink it. The first couple weeks were actually pretty good. We were both busy with our new jobs, so we didn't see each other much, but our few interactions were pleasant. We'd catch up in the kitchen while making dinner, share a bottle of wine occasionally on the weekend, and respect each other's space. I remember thinking I'd lucked out with a drama-free living situation. Then things started getting weird. I've always been a light sleeper. The smallest sounds wake me up. It's been that way since I was a kid. About a month after moving in, I started noticing Vanessa coming and going at really odd hours. The first time, I heard the front door open and close around 2 in the morning. I thought maybe she'd gone out with co-workers and was just getting home late, no big deal. But then it kept happening. Several times a week, I'd hear her leaving around midnight or 1, or sometimes even later. And sometimes I'd hear her returning at 4 or 5 in the morning, right before sunrise. Our walls were thin, and her bedroom was next to mine, so I could hear her bedroom door opening and closing too. After a couple weeks of this, I casually brought it up over breakfast one morning. "Late night last night, huh?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Vanessa looked at me with this blank expression and said, "What are you talking about? I was home all night." I was confused. "I heard the front door around 3 in the morning. I thought maybe you went out." "Wasn't me," she said flatly. "Must have been a neighbor or something. These walls are pretty thin." But it wasn't the walls. I definitely heard our actual front door. Still, I let it drop. Maybe I'd been half asleep and confused. Maybe she was embarrassed about whatever she was doing. It wasn't really my business. But the pattern continued. At least 3 nights a week, I'd hear her coming and going at these strange hours. Sometimes she'd leave at midnight and come back at 2. Sometimes she'd leave at 3 and not return until after I'd left for work the next morning. Once, I even heard her leaving at 5:30 a.m., like she was trying to be gone before I woke up. Every time I mentioned it, she denied it completely. Not just denied going out, but denied making any noise at all. She started getting visibly annoyed whenever I brought it up, so eventually I stopped asking. Then there were other small things I started noticing. Sometimes my things weren't quite where I'd left them. Nothing valuable missing, just shifted. My hairbrush on the wrong side of the sink. My laptop closed when I was certain I'd left it open. Once, I came home to find all my shoes arranged differently in the entryway. When I mentioned these things, Vanessa would just shrug and say she hadn't touched anything. She started spending less time in common areas when I was home. She'd grab food quickly and retreat to her room, or she'd leave entirely if I settled in to watch TV in the living room. I started wondering if maybe she had a secret boyfriend or some kind of night job she was embarrassed about. But why lie about it? We were both adults. It wasn't like I was judging her life choices. About 2 months into living together, things escalated from weird to genuinely unsettling. I started feeling like someone had been in my room while I was at work. Nothing major, just little things. My bed looked like someone had sat on it. A drawer not fully closed. My closet door slightly ajar when I was positive I'd shut it. At this point, I was getting genuinely uncomfortable, but I didn't have proof of anything specific. Was Vanessa going into my room, or was I being paranoid? I didn't want to accuse her without evidence, but the situation was making me increasingly anxious. I started keeping my bedroom door locked when I wasn't home. Then came that night, the one I still can't explain. It was a Friday, and I'd gone out with some coworkers after work. Nothing wild, just dinner and drinks, but I didn't get home until around midnight. The house was completely dark when I arrived, which wasn't unusual. What was strange was that Vanessa's bedroom door was wide open, and she wasn't there. Her bed was made, looking untouched. I called out, "Vanessa, you home?" No answer. I figured she must be out doing whatever mysterious thing she did at night. I was exhausted, so I just went through my bedtime routine and crawled into bed around 12:30. Despite being tired, I couldn't fall asleep. I kept tossing and turning, my mind racing about work stuff and this growing unease about my living situation. I'd been lying there for maybe 20 minutes when I heard a noise. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. These old places make all kinds of creaks and groans. But then I heard something else, something inside my room. I froze. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and I could make out the shapes of my furniture. The sound seemed to be coming from my closet, a soft, subtle movement. Then, slowly, my closet door began to open. I thought I was hallucinating. There's no way someone could be in there. I'd been home for almost an hour, but the door kept opening, inch by inch, and then, I swear I'm not making this up, Vanessa stepped out of my closet. I sat bolt upright in bed. "What the hell?" I shouted. The moment she realized I was awake and had seen her, she bolted. Didn't say a word, just sprinted out of my room. I heard her footsteps pounding down the hallway, then the front door opening and slamming shut. I sat there shaking, my heart racing so hard I could feel it in my throat. I turned on every light in my room and checked my closet. Nothing seemed disturbed, but she had definitely been in there, hiding in there. For how long? Had she been waiting for me to fall asleep? What was she planning to do? I couldn't process it. I called my friend Emma, who lived about 30 minutes away, and she told me to pack a bag and come over immediately. I did exactly that, grabbing essentials with shaking hands, constantly looking over my shoulder like Vanessa might reappear at any moment. I spent the weekend at Emma's place, completely freaked out. I kept trying to come up with rational explanations. Maybe Vanessa was sleepwalking. Maybe she was on some medication with weird side effects. But none of that explained why she'd be hiding in my closet in the middle of the night. On Monday, I took a personal day and went back to the house when I knew Vanessa would be at work. I packed up as much of my stuff as I could fit in my car. I came back the next day and got the rest. Vanessa was never there. It was like she was deliberately avoiding me. I texted her that I was moving out and would send my portion of the rent until the lease ended in 3 months. She never responded. I tried calling a few days later to get some kind of explanation, but she'd blocked my number. She also blocked me on all social media. It's been almost a year now, and I still have no idea why Vanessa was hiding in my closet that night. Was it a one-time thing? Or had she done it before when I was actually asleep? What was she doing during those late-night outings? Was she watching me sleep, taking my things? It makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. I've analyzed this from every angle. Maybe she had some kind of fascination with me I never picked up on. Maybe she was stealing from me in some way I haven't figured out yet. Maybe she was just deeply troubled. I've never gotten any answers. I still live in Oak Ridge City, but in a studio apartment now. No roommates. I've installed extra locks on my doors and closets. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I hear someone moving around. I check my closet every single night before bed, and sometimes again if I wake up during the night. The worst part is not knowing why, not knowing if she was doing other things while I was sleeping, not knowing if I was ever in actual danger. And honestly, at this point, I don't know if I even want answers anymore. Some mysteries are probably better left unsolved. Story 14. I never wanted to share this story publicly, but after all these years, I still can't explain what happened to me during my LDS mission on the reservation. I've talked to other missionaries who served in the same area, and a few had similar experiences, but most think we're just making up stories. I'm not. What I encountered out there still gives me nightmares, and I'm hoping maybe someone here can help me make sense of it. It all started about 11 years ago when I was serving with Elder Johnson in a remote part of the reservation. We had spent the day visiting members in scattered communities, and it was getting late, probably around 10 at night. The reservation roads are mostly unpaved, poorly marked, and there are stretches where you won't see another car for hours. We were heading back to our apartment when our old Corolla's gas light came on. I remember looking at Johnson and seeing the concern on his face. We were at least 30 miles from anything resembling civilization, and the nearest gas station was probably another 20 miles beyond that. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. The reservation is notorious for dead zones, especially in the areas we were traveling through. "How much farther can we make it?" Johnson asked. I didn't know. The car was a mission vehicle that had been passed down through countless elders, and its reliability was questionable at best. About 15 minutes later, the engine sputtered and died. We coasted to a stop on the side of the dirt road, surrounded by nothing but scrubby desert and the outline of mesas in the distance. The silence was absolute. No cars, no houses, no lights anywhere. Just us and a blanket of stars overhead that would have been beautiful if I wasn't freaking out about being stranded. We sat there for maybe an hour, hoping another car would pass by, but none did. We tried starting the car a few more times with no success. Finally, I remembered that one of the members had mentioned an old trading post about 5 miles up the road. We decided our only option was to walk there and hope they had some gas we could buy. We grabbed our flashlights and started walking. The reservation at night is a different world. The darkness is complete. There's no ambient light from cities or towns, and the silence is broken only by the occasional coyote howl or the rustle of something moving in the brush. We walked mostly in silence, our flashlight beams barely cutting through the darkness. After walking for what felt like forever but was probably only an hour, we spotted the trading post. To our surprise, there was a single light on inside, despite it being close to midnight. An older native man was inside, and when we explained our situation, he nodded like this happened all the time. He had a single gas can that he let us borrow, saying we could return it the next day when we came back through. The walk back to our car was when things started getting weird. About halfway there, I got this uncomfortable feeling that we were being watched. I tried to shake it off. Being out in the middle of nowhere at night will do that to you, but the feeling kept getting stronger. Johnson must have felt it too, because he kept looking over his shoulder. "Did you hear that?" he whispered at one point. I hadn't heard anything, but now I was straining to listen. That's when I caught it, a soft, scuffling sound, like something moving quickly over dirt, but it was hard to pinpoint where it was coming from. It seemed to be all around us. We picked up our pace, practically jogging the rest of the way to the car. When we finally reached it, I fumbled with the gas can while Johnson kept watch with his flashlight. I've never poured gas so quickly in my life. Once we got the car started, the relief was immense. We pulled back onto the road, the headlights barely illuminating the path ahead. I was driving, and Johnson was still looking out the windows, on edge. "Dude, I swear something's out there," he said, his voice tight. I was about to tell him he was being paranoid when I saw movement at the edge of our headlights. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote running alongside the road. But as I focused on it, I realized with growing horror that it wasn't an animal. It was humanoid, but running on all fours. and it was keeping pace with our car, even though I was going about 40 miles per hour. "Do you see that?" I asked Johnson, my voice barely a whisper. "See what?" he replied, looking in the wrong direction. Before I could point it out, I saw more movement on my side. 2 more figures running in the same unnatural way, hands and feet on the ground, but moving with a speed that nothing human should be capable of. I hit the gas harder, pushing our old car to 50, then 60 miles per hour on the rough dirt road. For a brief moment, one of the figures moved directly into our headlights. What I saw still haunts me. It looked human in basic shape, but its proportions were all wrong. Limbs too long, movements too fluid and animalistic. Its skin was dark, almost black in the headlights, and it turned its head toward us as it ran. I only caught a glimpse of its face, but what I saw made my blood run cold. Eyes that reflected our headlights like an animal's, but set in what was unmistakably a human-like face. I floored it, and the car fishtailed on the loose dirt. Johnson was yelling, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't speak. I just kept driving as fast as our old Corolla would go until we finally hit pavement and the lights of a small town appeared in the distance. When we finally reached our apartment, I was shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. I tried explaining to Johnson what I'd seen, but it sounded insane, even to me. He hadn't seen anything, but had felt the same sense of being watched, of being followed. We chalked it up to exhaustion and the natural fear that comes from being stranded in an isolated area at night. But that was just the beginning. 3 weeks later, I was transferred to a small town on the edge of the reservation. My new companion, Elder Martinez, and I were assigned to a small trailer that the church rented as missionary housing. It was isolated, sitting on about an acre of land with no close neighbors. The nearest house was at least a quarter mile away. Our first few nights there were uneventful, but on our 4th night, at exactly 2 in the morning, we were awakened by loud, deliberate knocking on our front door. 3 distinct knocks, then silence. In missionary housing, late-night knocks usually meant an emergency with a church member, so Martinez got up to answer it while I fumbled for the light. When he opened the door, there was no one there. The porch light revealed nothing but empty darkness beyond. "Hello?" Martinez called out. No answer. We were about to go back to bed, thinking maybe it had been the wind or an animal, when 3 more knocks came, this time from the back door on the opposite side of the trailer. We looked at each other, and I felt the same cold fear I'd experienced on that dark road weeks before. Martinez grabbed a flashlight, and we went to the back door together. Again, nothing was there. Then more knocking, this time from a window on the side of the trailer. Whatever was doing this was moving around our house, knocking from different places as if playing some kind of game. This continued for almost an hour. Knocks from different locations, always 3 at a time, always when we were looking somewhere else. We kept all the lights on and sat in the middle of the trailer, back to back, listening as the knocks moved around us. Eventually they stopped, and we spent the rest of the night awake, afraid to close our eyes. When morning finally came, we went outside to check around the trailer. What we found made my skin crawl. Footprints circled the entire trailer. Some were clearly human, with shoe prints we could identify, but others were strange, spaced oddly, like someone moving on hands and feet. The prints went all the way, around our home, under every window, past every door. We reported it to our mission president, who suggested it might be local kids playing pranks on the new missionaries. He arranged for some members to come stay with us for a few nights, but nothing happened while they were there. The night after they left, the knocking returned, but this time it was accompanied by soft laughter outside our windows, high-pitched, almost childlike, but somehow wrong. After a week of this, I was transferred again. I didn't tell my new companion about my experiences. I didn't want him to think I was losing it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me from that night on the dark road. In this new area, I was serving in a slightly larger town that bordered the reservation. One evening, we were driving a church member, Sister Begay, back to her home after a service activity. Her house was in a wooded area about 15 minutes outside town. As we turned onto the dirt road leading to her property, she suddenly became very tense, staring out the window into the trees. "Drive faster, please," she said quietly. I was about to ask why when I saw it. Between two trees about 30 yards off the road stood a dark figure. It was human-shaped but somehow wrong. Too tall, limbs too long, crouched in a way that no human would stand. Even from that distance, I could feel it watching us. Sister Begay saw it too. I heard her quick intake of breath and felt her hand grip my shoulder. "Don't look at it," she whispered. "Just drive." I pressed the gas harder, keeping my eyes on the road, but I couldn't help glancing in the rearview mirror. The figure was gone from where it had been standing, but for a brief second, I thought I saw movement closer to the road, as if it had covered 30 yards in seconds. When we reached Sister Begay's house, she practically jumped from the car. "You boys need to leave, now," she said, her voice shaking. "Get back to town before dark." We tried to ask what was happening, but she just shook her head. "Some things on the reservation don't like outsiders. Go now." We did as she asked, but when we got back to our car, Martinez froze. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the driver's side door. Smeared across the door was dirt, arranged in what looked like handprints, but the fingers were unnaturally long and thin. Similar marks were on all the doors, as if something had examined our car while we were walking Sister Begay to her house. During my final month in the area, we were visiting a family on the far edge of the reservation. A storm had blown in, and they insisted we stay for dinner and wait it out. By the time we left, it was well after dark, and the rain had turned the dirt roads into mud slicks. As we made our slow way back, I heard it, whistling, somewhere outside the car. At first I thought it was the wind, but it had a tune to it, something almost familiar but distorted. Martinez heard it too. I saw his knuckles go white on the steering wheel. The whistling followed us for miles, sometimes seeming to come from right outside our windows, other times fading as if whatever was making it had fallen behind, only to return moments later from a different direction. We didn't speak, didn't acknowledge it, just kept driving as fast as we safely could on the muddy roads. We stayed at the family's house that night, and in the morning, we found their fence torn apart, with what looked like claw marks scored deep into the wooden posts. My final encounter happened a week before I was scheduled to return home. Martinez and I were driving back from a late meeting with our district leader. It was probably around 11 at night, and we were on one of those long, straight reservation roads that seemed to go on forever. Martinez was dozing in the passenger seat when I saw them again. The figures on all fours, running alongside our car, just at the edge of the headlight's reach. This time, there were more of them. 5 or 6, at least, keeping perfect pace with us despite my pushing 60 miles per hour. I didn't wake Martinez. I didn't want to frighten him, and part of me wondered if I was hallucinating. But then, one of the figures did something that proved they were terrifyingly real. It launched itself directly into the path of our headlights. For the first time, I saw one clearly. It had the basic shape of a human, but was naked and emaciated, with skin that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Its limbs were disproportionately long, especially its arms, and its face. Its face had features that were almost human, but distorted, with eyes that glowed unnaturally bright in our headlights. Instead of stopping, I hit the gas harder. The thing jumped back, avoiding the car with impossible speed and agility. In the rearview mirror, I saw the figures falling behind as our car picked up speed, but they continued to follow until we reached the paved road and the small cluster of lights that marked the edge of town. I finished my mission the following week and returned home without telling anyone else about what I'd seen. I've spent years trying to rationalize these experiences: stress, exhaustion, the power of suggestion in an unfamiliar environment. But deep down, I know what I saw was real. I've researched Native American legends since then and found stories of skinwalkers and other entities that match some of what I experienced. But I still don't have answers. All I know is that there are things out there on that reservation, things that move too fast, that watch from the darkness, that knock on doors at night, things that, for whatever reason, seemed drawn to me during my time there. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know if they meant harm or were simply curious about outsiders. But I do know that to this day, I can't hear knocking at night without breaking into a cold sweat, and I will never drive those dark reservation roads again. Story 15. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family and the police, but it's been 20 years now, and I still get chills thinking about it. I guess writing it out might help me process what happened that Black Friday back in 2003. I was 20 years old, home from college for Thanksgiving break. Our town, Riverdale, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. You know, one of those sleepy little communities where nothing ever happened. At least that's what I thought. That Friday morning, I got up super early to hit the Black Friday sales. I'd saved up from my part-time job at the campus bookstore specifically for this. My parents thought I was crazy getting up at 4 in the morning, but the deals were worth it, especially for a broke college student like me. The local mall wasn't huge, but it had all the basics. I'd already grabbed a new sweater from Old Navy and some makeup from Sephora when I decided to check out Circuit City. I needed a new CD player. Yeah, I know that dates me. And they had one advertised for 50% off. The store wasn't as packed as the clothing shops, which was nice. I was browsing through the CD players when this employee approached me. He had a name tag that said Todd. At first, I didn't think anything of it. He was just doing his job, right? "Need any help finding something?" he asked. He looked maybe mid-20s, kind of tall with this dark brown hair that needed a cut. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him, just a normal-looking guy in a blue Circuit City polo. I told him I was interested in the CD player from the ad, and he walked me over to where they were displayed. As he explained the features, I noticed he kept standing a little too close, and there was something off about the way he smiled. Not obviously creepy, just intense. But I brushed it off because retail workers have to be friendly, especially during big sales. What started feeling weird was how he kept finding reasons to talk to me as I moved around the store. I'd go look at DVDs, and suddenly there he was, asking if I'd seen some new release. I'd check out digital cameras, and he'd materialize beside me with recommendations. Each time, he'd ask personal questions: where I went to school, if I lived locally, was I just visiting for the holidays? I gave vague answers, but he was persistent. "You must go to State, right? I think I've seen you around campus," he said. I definitely hadn't seen him before, and I didn't even go to State. I went to a college about 3 hours away. By the time I was ready to check out, I had an uncomfortable feeling in my stomach, but I still didn't think it was anything serious. Just an overeager sales guy who probably worked on commission. I brought my items to the register, the CD player and a couple of CDs. Todd insisted on checking me out personally, even though another register was open. As he scanned my items, he said, "For the protection plan, I need to register this with your address." I hesitated, but it sounded legitimate enough. The total was almost $200, and a protection plan made sense for electronics. So I gave him my parents' address. I still remember the look on his face when I spelled out our street name, like he was memorizing it. He typed it in slowly, repeating each part back to me. "Henderson, 420 Oak Street, Riverdale." Then he smiled again, that same intense smile. Perfect. As he handed me my bag, his fingers lingered against mine for just a second too long. "Hope to see you again soon, Ashley," he said. I don't remember telling him my first name, but I figured I must have during our conversation. I left the store feeling uneasy, but told myself I was being dramatic. This was Riverdale, after all. Nothing bad happened here. I spent the rest of the day helping my mom with leftovers and catching up with a couple of high school friends who were also home for the break. By evening, I was exhausted from the early morning and the shopping. My parents and I decided to watch a movie together in the living room. Mom made popcorn, Dad picked some action flick he'd been wanting to see, and I curled up on the couch. It felt safe and normal. Around 9 that night, there was a knock at our door. It was odd because we weren't expecting anyone, and in Riverdale, people usually called before dropping by, especially that late. Dad paused the movie and went to answer it. I wasn't paying much attention until I heard the door open and my dad say, "Can I help you?" in that confused tone. Something made me get up and peek around the corner toward the front door. My blood ran cold. Standing on our porch, illuminated by the porch light, was Todd from Circuit City. He was wearing the same blue polo shirt from earlier, and he was holding something in his hands, a small package. As soon as he saw me appear behind my dad, his expression changed. It's hard to describe, but it was like a mask slipped for just a second. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me with this intense look that made my skin crawl. Then, without a word, he turned and bolted off our porch. Dad was completely confused. "Who the hell was that?" he asked, looking out into the darkness where Todd had disappeared. My hands were shaking as I explained to my parents about the weird Circuit City employee. Mom immediately went to make sure all the doors and windows were locked, while Dad called the non-emergency police line to report the incident. The officer said they'd drive by our house a few times that night, but couldn't do much else since Todd hadn't actually done anything illegal yet. We tried to go back to the movie, but the mood was ruined. I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see Todd's face pressed against the glass. My parents tried to reassure me, saying it was probably just a misguided attempt to deliver something I'd forgotten at the store, but I knew I hadn't forgotten anything, and the look in his eyes when he saw me wasn't the look of someone doing a favor. Around 11, we decided to call it a night. Dad checked all the locks again and said he'd leave the hallway light on. I went to my old bedroom, changed into pajamas, and tried to calm myself down. I told myself I was overreacting, that Todd was just socially awkward and would realize how inappropriate his behavior was. I was exhausted from getting up so early, so despite my anxiety, I fell asleep pretty quickly. I don't know exactly how long I was asleep before something woke me up. My room was dark, except for the faint glow of my digital clock that read 2:17 in the morning. At first, I didn't know what had woken me. Then I heard it, a soft tapping sound. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from my window. My bedroom was on the first floor, with a window that faced our backyard. The curtains were mostly closed, but there was a small gap where they didn't quite meet in the middle. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I focused on that gap. And that's when I saw it. A face pressed close to the glass, staring in through that tiny space between the curtains. Todd's face. I froze completely. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even scream. His eyes were locked on me, and I could see the condensation from his breath on the window. He must have been standing there for a while, watching me sleep. When our eyes met, he smiled. Not a normal smile, but a wide, unsettling grin that made my stomach turn. Then he raised his hand and waved at me, like we were friends meeting across a room. That broke my paralysis. I threw off my covers and ran from my bedroom, not even looking back to see if he was still there. I sprinted down the hallway to the kitchen where our phone was, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. The dispatcher answered, and I blurted out that there was a man looking through my bedroom window. She kept me on the line, telling me to wake my parents and stay away from windows. I ran to their room, still clutching the cordless phone, and practically screamed that Todd was outside. Dad jumped out of bed immediately and grabbed a baseball bat from the closet. Mom stayed with me as we moved to the living room, away from any ground floor windows. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as Dad checked the doors and peered out the front windows. "The police are on their way," the dispatcher assured me over the phone. "Are you all in a safe place in the house?" The minutes waiting for the police felt like hours. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind outside sounded like Todd trying to get in. Dad kept pacing between windows, checking different angles of our yard. When the police finally arrived, their flashing lights illuminated our front yard through the curtains. I've never been so relieved to see those blue and red lights. 2 officers came to the door while others searched our property. I had to tell the whole story again. Meeting Todd at Circuit City, him showing up at our door earlier, and now finding him peering through my window. The officers took detailed notes and asked for a description. One of them radioed to the officers outside to look for footprints or any evidence in the backyard. A female officer stayed with me, asking gentle questions about what Todd had said at the store, if he'd made any threats, how he'd acted. I remembered the way he'd carefully input our address into the system and told her about that. "We'll check with Circuit City first thing in the morning," she promised. "But tonight, we'll have a car stationed near your house until dawn." They found footprints in the soft soil beneath my window and what looked like handprints on the glass. Todd was gone, but he'd definitely been there. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. None of us did. We all sat in the living room with every light on, jumping at every sound. I kept seeing Todd's face in my mind, that eerie smile as he watched me through the window. The next morning, the police contacted Circuit City and identified Todd Matthews based on my description. He didn't show up for his shift that day. When they went to the address he had on file, his roommate said Todd hadn't come home the night before. I later found out that Circuit City fired him immediately when they heard what happened. Apparently, there had been previous complaints about him being too pushy with female customers, but nothing as extreme as what he'd done to me. The police took it seriously, filing a stalking report and getting a restraining order against him. They found him 2 days later staying at a motel just outside of town. He was arrested for trespassing and stalking. I went back to college as soon as possible, too shaken to stay in my parents' house any longer. When I came home for Christmas break, my dad had installed an alarm system and motion sensor lights all around the house. I never saw Todd again after that night. I heard through the Riverdale grapevine that he eventually moved away after facing charges. But even now, 20 years later, I still check my windows before going to bed. I still freeze when I hear unexpected tapping sounds at night. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did. How long had he been watching me sleep? What was he planning to do? These questions still haunt me, especially on cold November nights when the memory feels freshest. I can't look at a Circuit City advertisement or even their former locations that are now other stores without feeling sick to my stomach. And Black Friday, I shop online now, always. Story 16. I seriously can't shake the events of Black Friday last year. I've been debating whether to post this for months, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it all. My best friend Stephanie and I had been planning our Black Friday shopping for weeks. We're both 26 and have made this our tradition since college. Hitting the sales, grabbing lunch, making a whole day of it. This year we decided on Pinewood Mall in our town of Oak Ridge, since our mutual friend Jack recently started working at the Verizon kiosk there. The mall was packed, as you'd expect on Black Friday. We got there around 9 in the morning, and the parking garage was already a nightmare. We finally found a spot on the 3rd level, pretty far from the entrance. I remember joking with Steph about how we'd never find our car again among the sea of vehicles. Inside, the mall was absolute chaos. People everywhere, bags in hand, Christmas music blaring through the speakers. We made our way through Macy's first, then stopped by to say hi to Jack. He was swamped with customers wanting phone deals, but he took a quick break to chat with us. Killer sales today, Jack said, looking exhausted already. I've been here since 5 a.m. We promised to catch up with him later, maybe grab coffee when his shift ended, and continued our shopping. We hit up Bath & Body Works. Their 3-wick candles were half off, and Victoria's Secret needed new bras. Normal stuff, you know. About an hour after we'd seen Jack, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text read, "Come back to see Jack. He wants to show you something." I showed Steph the message. Weird. Must be Jack using a work phone or something. We weren't far from the Verizon kiosk, so we headed back. Jack looked surprised to see us again so soon. "That was quick," he said. "Thought you two would be lost in the sales for hours." I held up my phone. "Didn't you text me to come back?" His face scrunched up in confusion. "No, I've been helping customers non-stop. My phone's in my locker." I showed him the message. He confirmed the number wasn't his. A chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off. Probably just crossed wires or something. Maybe Jack had mentioned us to a co-worker who was being weirdly helpful. I don't know. We decided to ignore it and move on with our day. By noon, we were starving. The food court was a madhouse, but we managed to snag a small table after hovering awkwardly near a family that was finishing up. I got Chinese food while Steph went for pizza. We were sitting there, comparing our purchases and planning which stores to hit next, when my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. "You look cute today. Blue really suits you." I was wearing a blue sweater. I immediately felt exposed, vulnerable. I scanned the food court, but it was packed with hundreds of shoppers. Anyone could be watching us. "What is it?" Steph asked, noticing my expression. I showed her the text. "Someone's watching us." She glanced around too, but it was impossible to spot anyone suspicious in the crowd. Maybe it's someone who knows you? A secret admirer? I texted back, "Who is this?" No response. I tried to continue eating, but my appetite was gone. My mind raced through possibilities. An old classmate? Someone from work? But how would they have my number? 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo of me eating. It had been taken seconds ago, zoomed in uncomfortably close to my face. The angle was from somewhere to my left. My hands started shaking. "Steph," I whispered, sliding my phone to her. "Look." Her eyes widened. "Holy shit, Em, that's not okay." We both started searching the crowd more intently now, and that's when I saw him, standing at the edge of the food court, near the entrance to JCPenney. A man, maybe in his 30s, average height, wearing a dark jacket. He wasn't even trying to hide. He was staring directly at me, and when our eyes met, he smiled. Not a friendly smile, the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl. "There," I nodded slightly in his direction. "The guy in the dark jacket." Steph turned casually to look. "The one with the weird smile? Fuck, he's creepy." We both watched as he lifted his phone and took another photo of us. Bold as day. No shame. "We need to leave," I said, gathering my things. "Now." As soon as we stood up, he started walking toward us, not rushing but deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. My heart was pounding in my ears. We abandoned our half-eaten food and pushed through the crowd in the opposite direction. I looked back once to see him still following, maintaining the same steady pace. "Let's go down the escalator," Steph suggested. "Head toward the parking garage." We took the escalator to the lower level, practically jogging once we reached the bottom. I kept checking behind us, and each time I caught glimpses of his dark jacket. He wasn't running either, but somehow he was keeping pace, like he knew exactly where we were going. "Should we find security?" I asked, breathless. "The exit is closer," Steph replied. "Let's just get to the car." We hurried through the main corridor, past stores with their bright sale signs and oblivious shoppers. The mall seemed to stretch forever. By the time we reached the doors to the parking garage, I was nearly in a panic. The garage was cold and eerily quiet compared to the noise of the mall. Our footsteps echoed as we power-walked toward the elevator. I jabbed the button repeatedly. Come on," I muttered. I looked back toward the mall entrance. No sign of him yet. The elevator arrived with a ding that made me jump. We got in and I pressed 3 for our level, then frantically hit the close door button. Just as the doors began to slide shut, I saw him, emerging from the mall entrance, scanning the area. Our eyes met again through the narrowing gap of the elevator doors. His smile widened. Then the doors closed completely. "Jesus Christ," Steph whispered. "Who the fuck is that guy?" I shook my head, unable to speak. My phone buzzed. Again. I almost dropped it trying to pull it from my pocket. Running already? The fun's just starting. The elevator seemed to take forever to reach the 3rd level. When the doors finally opened, we practically sprinted to my car. Keys. I fumbled through my purse with trembling hands. "Hurry, Em." Steph kept glancing toward the elevator and stairwell. I finally found my keys and unlocked the car. We jumped in, locked the doors immediately, and I started the engine with shaking hands. As I began to back out, I saw movement by the elevator. He was there, walking calmly toward us, still smiling. I slammed the car into drive and peeled out of the parking space. Steph kept her eyes on him through the side mirror. "He's just standing there watching us leave," she said. "He's not even trying to follow anymore." I didn't slow down until we were on the main road, putting distance between us and the mall. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. "How did he get my number?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "And how did he know about Jack?" Steph shook her head. "I don't know. Did you post about going to see Jack today on Instagram or something?" "No, we didn't even plan to see Jack until yesterday." A horrible thought occurred to me. What if he's been following me before today? What if he's been watching me for a while? We drove straight to the police station. The officer who took our report was sympathetic, but not particularly helpful. Without a clear threat or the man's identity, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested we report it to mall security, which we did by phone after leaving the station. I blocked the unknown number when we got back to my apartment. Steph stayed over that night. Neither of us wanted to be alone. We double-checked all the locks and kept the lights on until morning. The texts stopped after I blocked the number, but the feeling of being watched didn't. For weeks afterward, I'd catch myself scanning crowds, looking over my shoulder in parking lots, scrutinizing every unfamiliar face. I've never gone back to Pinewood Mall. I do all my shopping online now. Steph says I'm letting him win, but she doesn't understand. It's not just what happened that day. It's the questions that remain. How long had he been watching me? How did he get my number? How did he know about Jack? Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I hear the buzz of an incoming text. I check my phone, but there's nothing there. Just the lingering fear that somewhere he's still watching, waiting for the next Black Friday, the next crowded mall, the next opportunity to get close to me again. I doubt I'll ever know who he was or what he wanted, but I can't shake the feeling that I haven't seen the last of him, that one day my phone will buzz with a message from an unknown number and it'll start all over again. Story 17. I've never shared this before. Just typing this makes my hands shake. It happened 4 years ago, but I still wake up some nights hearing that whistle. I grew up on the Navajo reservation but left when I was 18. I didn't want anything to do with the old ways my grandfather always talked about. I moved to Phoenix, started college, made new friends. I was done with reservation life. My friends Luis and Corey were film students working on a documentary about Native American culture. They kept bugging me to take them to Canyon de Chelly, specifically near Spider Rock where my grandfather's land was. I refused for months, making excuses about work or school. The truth is, I knew better. There are places where you don't go unless you're prepared. Places where the old stories are more than just stories, but they wore me down. Luis promised it would only be 3 days of filming and they'd cover all expenses. I finally gave in. We left Phoenix around 6 in the morning on a Friday in October. The drive was about 4 hours, but it felt longer. The closer we got to the reservation, the more anxious I became. I hadn't been back since my grandfather's funeral 2 years earlier. We stopped at a gas station just outside Chinle. While Luis and Corey loaded up on snacks, I noticed an old man watching me from near the register. He was maybe in his 70s, with deep wrinkles and eyes that seemed to look right through me. "You're John Begay's grandson, aren't you?" he asked in Navajo. I nodded, surprised he recognized me. "You shouldn't be here," he said, switching to English. "Not with outsiders. Not now." "We're just filming for a school project," I explained, feeling defensive. He glanced at Luis and Corey, then leaned closer. "Listen carefully. Don't whistle at night, and if you hear whistling, don't answer it. Don't even acknowledge it." I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew what he was talking about, but I just nodded and hurried back to the car. "What was that about?" Corey asked. Nothing, just someone who knew my grandfather. We reached the visitor center around noon. I had special permission to access my grandfather's land, which bordered the national monument. The ranger gave us a map and reminded us to respect the sacred sites. I could tell he was uneasy about us camping there, but my family name still carried weight. We set up camp about a mile from Spider Rock in a small clearing surrounded by juniper trees. Luis was ecstatic about the location, filming everything while Corey set up the tent. I couldn't shake the uneasiness I felt. The wind seemed to whisper through the canyon in a way that made the hair on my neck stand up. That night, we sat around a small fire while Luis asked me questions about Navajo beliefs for his documentary. I kept my answers vague, especially when he asked about skinwalkers. Some things you just don't talk about. "Come on, Daniel," Luis pressed. "Your grandma told us you used to know all the stories." "Some stories aren't meant to be shared," I said firmly, "especially not on film." We went to bed around 11. I was sharing a tent with both of them, their equipment piled in one corner. I fell into an uneasy sleep, dreams filled with my grandfather's voice warning me about something I couldn't quite understand. I woke up sometime around 3 in the morning. At first I thought it was the wind that woke me, but then I heard it. A soft, distant whistle. 3 notes, rising in pitch, then 3 notes falling. It was coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond our tent. I froze, suddenly wide awake. The old man's warning echoed in my head. Luis and Corey were still asleep, oblivious. The whistling came again, closer this time. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. "Daniel," my grandfather's voice, exactly as I remembered it. "Daniel, come outside. I need to show you something." My grandfather had been dead for 2 years. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, as the voice called again. "Daniel, hurry. It's important." Against every instinct, I crawled to the tent flap and unzipped it just enough to peek out. The moon was bright enough to see the clearing around our tent. At first, I saw nothing. Then, at the edge of the trees, I spotted a figure. It was crouched low to the ground, its proportions all wrong. Its arms were unnaturally long, hands touching the dirt. Its head was tilted at an impossible angle, and even from that distance, I could see its eyes reflecting the moonlight like an animal's. It wasn't moving, just watching our tent, watching me. I zipped the tent closed as quietly as I could and curled up in my sleeping bag, heart pounding so hard I was sure it would wake my friends. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When morning came, I didn't mention what I'd seen. I told myself it was a nightmare, a trick of moonlight and shadows. Luis was reviewing the photos he'd taken the previous day, while Corey made instant coffee on our camp stove. "Hey, check this out," Luis said suddenly, holding up his camera. "Did either of you see anyone else around here yesterday?" He showed us a photo he'd taken of Spider Rock at sunset. In the distance, perched on a ledge, was a dark figure. It was blurry in the photo, but I could make out the same unnatural proportions I'd seen in the night. It was crouched like a gargoyle, limbs bent at odd angles. "Probably just a shadow," Corey suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. "We need to move our camp," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now." They argued, but something in my expression must have convinced them. We packed up and moved about half a mile away to a more open area with less tree cover. As we set up the new camp, I gathered ash from our previous fire, cedar bark, and some cornmeal I'd brought as a snack. My grandmother had taught me how to make a protective circle when I was young. I never thought I'd need to use it. I drew a circle around our tent, sprinkling the mixture in a continuous line. Luis thought it was for his documentary and filmed me doing it. Corey made jokes about superstition. I let them think what they wanted. That night was clear and cold. We huddled in the tent after dinner, Luis and Corey going through their footage while I pretended to read. Every sound from outside made me tense up. Around midnight, we all heard it. Something was moving around our camp, footsteps circling the tent, pausing occasionally, then a sound like sniffing along the fabric of the tent. "What the hell is that?" Corey whispered. "A coyote?" I shook my head, putting my finger to my lips. The footsteps continued circling closer to the protective line I'd drawn. Then they stopped. "Daniel?" It was Luis's voice, but Luis was sitting right next to me, eyes wide with fear. "Daniel, let me in. I'm cold." Luis grabbed my arm, his face pale. "That's my voice," he mouthed silently. Whatever was outside started speaking in Corey's voice next, then mine, then my grandfather's. It cycled through them all like it was trying them on. Corey suddenly stood up. "I need to pee," he whispered. "No," I hissed. "Don't leave the tent. Don't cross the circle." But Corey was already unzipping the flap. "I'll just go right outside. I can't hold it." He stepped outside just beyond the circle. The moonlight illuminated him as he stood there, hesitating. Then he looked toward the darkness beyond our camp and froze. "There's something out there," he whispered, backing up slowly. "It's watching us." He stumbled back into the tent, zipping it up with shaking hands. His face was white as a sheet. "It has no face," he said, "just shadows where a face should be." We huddled together in the center of the tent, listening as the thing outside continued to circle us. It kept mimicking our voices, sometimes mixing them together in impossible ways. Luis was filming everything, holding his camera like a shield. Around 3 a.m, Luis suddenly stood up. "What are you doing?" I grabbed his arm. "I'm going to get a clear shot of it," he said, pulling away from me. "No one will believe us without evidence." Before I could stop him, he unzipped the tent and stepped outside. I heard him walking a few paces away, then silence. "Luis?" Corey called softly. Nothing. We waited 5 minutes, then 10. No sign of Luis. "We have to find him," Corey said, reaching for his flashlight. "No," I said firmly. "We stay in the circle until dawn." We argued back and forth until we heard a sound from outside. Something had been dropped near our tent. I cautiously peeked out to see Luis's camera sitting just outside the circle. I reached out, careful not to break the line, and grabbed it. When we reviewed the footage, I almost threw up. The camera showed Luis walking away from the tent, panning around the darkness. Then it caught something moving at the edge of the frame. Something tall and thin, walking on all fours but with limbs bent backward. The camera jerked, and for a split second, we saw it clearly. It had Luis's face, but wrong, like his skin had been stretched over something else's skull. The footage ended there. We didn't sleep. As soon as the first light of dawn appeared, we packed up everything and ran to my truck. The keys were in my pocket, but when we got there, the engine wouldn't start. The hood was still warm, and when I looked inside, I found the distributor cap missing. The inside of the truck had been ransacked. Scratched into the dashboard were the words, "We follow your voice." Corey was coming apart, alternating between sobbing and yelling for Luis. I knew we needed shelter before nightfall. I remembered my grandfather telling me about an old hogan, a traditional Navajo dwelling about 2 miles from where we were. It had been used for protection ceremonies and might still have some power. We grabbed what supplies we could carry and started walking. The sun was getting higher, but the air felt cold. I kept looking back, feeling eyes on us from the rocks and trees around the trail. We found the hogan around late afternoon. It was old but still intact, with its eastern-facing door and roof vent. I knew the basic protective rituals from what my grandmother had taught me. I gathered sage from nearby and burned it inside, wafting the smoke into every corner while saying the prayers I could remember. Corey sat in the middle of the floor, clutching Luis's camera and watching the sun sink lower through the door. "What's happening, Daniel?" he asked, his voice hollow. "What took Luis?" I didn't answer directly. "We need to stay quiet," I said instead. "No talking after dark, no answering if you hear voices." The sun set. Darkness filled the hogan except for the faint moonlight coming through the roof vent. We sat back to back in the center, listening. For hours, nothing happened. I started to hope that the hogan's protection was working. Then we heard the whistling. 3 notes up, 3 notes down. It circled the hogan, sometimes close, sometimes farther away. Then the voices started. Luis's voice calling for help, my grandfather's voice, my voice, Corey's voice. "Please," it said in Corey's own terrified tones. "Please let me in. It's hurting me." Corey began to shake, tears streaming down his face. I squeezed his arm hard, reminding him to stay silent. The thing outside began to get angry. The voices became distorted, overlapping. The walls of the hogan shook as something large slammed against them repeatedly. Dust and debris rained down from the roof. I don't remember much after that, just flashes. The roof vent being blocked by something looking in. The door shuddering as if something was throwing itself against it. Corey screaming when a long, thin arm with too many joints reached through a crack in the wall. Park rangers found us 2 days later, dehydrated and incoherent. The search for Luis went on for weeks. They never found his body. I moved in with my grandmother after that. She performed cleansing ceremonies for me every day for a month. Corey went back to Phoenix, but we don't talk anymore. The footage from Luis's camera was corrupted when the Rangers tried to view it. Sometimes I wake up hearing that whistle, 3 notes up, 3 notes down. My grandmother says I brought something back with me. Last week she pointed to my shadow on the wall and asked why it didn't move when I did. I was too afraid to look. I still don't know what happened at Canyon de Chelly. I just know that some stories aren't just stories, and some places should be left alone. Story 18. I still get chills thinking about this. I've never shared this with anyone online before, but after 23 years, I figure maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. Back in 2000, I was 22 and working as a senior sales associate at the GameStop in Millfield. It was a tiny store in the Riverside Strip Mall, barely bigger than a large living room. Any of you who've worked retail know that Black Friday is basically retail hell, but that year was especially insane because the PlayStation 2 had just been released a month earlier. We were completely sold out of actual PS2 consoles, but we still had a decent stock of games and accessories, plus all the other regular stuff. My manager, Dave, had assigned me to handle the line outside. Basically, I had to make sure we didn't violate fire code by letting too many people in at once. I showed up at 4 in the morning, even though we weren't opening until 6. Dave was already there setting up, and by 4:30, we already had about 15 people camping out front. The first hour or so was pretty standard. People were tired but excited, chatting about what games they were hoping to score. I had a clipboard and was keeping track of who was where in line, making small talk, the usual customer service stuff. The sun wasn't even up yet, and it was freezing. I remember my fingers going numb even with gloves on. The parking lot lights cast this weird yellow glow over everything, making the whole scene feel slightly off. Around 5:45, I noticed him. He just appeared in the line. I don't remember seeing him walk up or anything. One minute I was checking my list, and the next he was there, standing about 20 people back. Even in the dim light, he stood out immediately. He was tall, really tall, probably 6'5" or 6, and rail thin. But what made my stomach drop was the mask. It covered his entire head, not just his face. It wasn't a Halloween mask or anything seasonal. It looked handmade, like someone had stitched together beige fabric over a frame of some kind. There were small eye holes and what looked like a slit for the mouth, but otherwise it was completely featureless. No nose bump, no expression, nothing. I figured maybe he was some weirdo trying to get attention or pull a prank. We get all types on Black Friday. I kept glancing at him while managing the line, but he never moved. He just stood there, perfectly still, hands at his sides. Everyone around him seemed to be giving him extra space without even realizing it. When we finally opened the doors at 6, I started letting people in 5 at a time. Everything was going smoothly until it was the masked guy's turn. "Sir, you can go in now," I said, gesturing toward the door. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge me at all. I tried again, thinking maybe he didn't hear me. "Excuse me? You can enter the store now." Nothing. Just those empty eye holes staring at me. The people behind him were getting antsy, so I said, "If you're not ready, I'll have to let the next people go ahead of you." Finally, he moved, just a slight step to the side, allowing the group behind him to pass. I thought maybe he'd changed his mind about shopping, but he didn't leave. He just stood there, off to the side of the entrance. This continued for the next hour. Every time I'd offer to let him in, he'd just step aside. Eventually the line dwindled down to nothing, and he was the only one left outside. I had to go back into the store to help with the register since we were swamped. I mentioned the weird guy to Dave as I came in. "There's some guy in a mask outside who won't come in," I told him. "As long as he's not causing trouble, ignore him," Dave said, too busy with the chaos inside to care. For the next few hours, I mostly forgot about the masked man. The store was packed wall to wall with people fighting over games and accessories. I was running back and forth between the stockroom and the floor, ringing up customers, answering questions about which games were compatible with which systems, the usual Black Friday madness. Around 10, I happened to glance toward the front windows and felt my blood freeze. The masked man was standing directly outside, face pressed against the glass, staring in, not moving, not shopping at other stores, just watching. His hands were pressed flat against the window, and even from inside, I could see how unnaturally long and thin his fingers were. I nudged my co-worker, Melissa. "You see that guy?" She looked up from the register and frowned. "The creep in the mask? Yeah, he's been there for hours. Keeps moving from window to window. Hours. He'd been watching us for hours, and I hadn't even noticed." "Has he come in at all?" I asked. "Nope, just stares." Kevin went out for his break and said the guy wouldn't respond when he asked if he needed help. Throughout the morning rush, I kept spotting him at different windows. Sometimes he'd disappear for 20 minutes, and I'd think he'd finally left, but then he'd be back, always watching, never coming in. My shift was supposed to end at noon, and I was counting down the minutes. The store had quieted down a bit, still busy, but not the complete chaos of the morning. Around 11:30, I realized I hadn't seen the masked man for almost an hour. I felt relieved thinking he'd finally gone. Dave let me clock out 15 minutes early since I'd started before dawn. I was exhausted and just wanted to get home and crash. I gathered my stuff from the back room and headed out to the parking lot. It was a clear, cold day, and the parking lot was still pretty full with Black Friday shoppers. I'd had to park way in the back that morning since I arrived after the earliest bird shoppers. As I walked toward my car, I felt that familiar prickle on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. I turned around slowly, scanning the area. Nothing seemed out of place at first. Then I noticed movement in the bushes that separated the parking lot from the small wooded area behind the mall. There, half hidden among the branches, was the masked figure. He was crouched down, one hand on the ground for balance, the other gripping a branch he'd pulled aside to see through. That blank, expressionless mask was pointed directly at me. Even from about 50 feet away, I could feel his stare boring into me. My heart started hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I quickened my pace, fumbling for my keys as I half jogged to my car. I kept looking back, and each time he had moved closer, always staying partially hidden, behind a car, then a light pole, then a shopping cart return. I finally reached my car, an old Honda Civic, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. No remote entry back then. Just as I yanked the door open, I heard footsteps rapidly approaching from behind. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, immediately hitting the lock button. Through my rearview mirror, I saw him standing about 20 feet behind my car, perfectly still again, just watching. I started the engine with trembling hands and peeled out of there, probably faster than was safe in a crowded parking lot. In my mirror, I could see him standing in the empty parking space, following my car with that blank face until I turned onto the main road. The whole 6-minute drive home, I kept checking my mirrors, convinced he was somehow following me. I took 3 random turns just to make sure. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, I sat in my car for almost 10 minutes, scanning the area before I felt safe enough to go inside. Once inside, I locked the door, closed all the blinds, and collapsed on my couch, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had it been some weird prank, a disturbed person, or something worse? I called the store later that afternoon to talk to Dave, asking if the guy had come back. Dave said he hadn't seen anyone in a mask, and when I described the whole situation in more detail, he seemed concerned but chalked it up to some freak trying to scare people on Black Friday. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a weirdo who got his kicks frightening retail workers. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply wrong about the whole encounter. The way he moved, the way he watched, the fact that he spent over 6 hours outside our store without ever coming in or going to any other shops. For months afterward, I checked the bushes in every parking lot before walking to my car. I requested morning shifts so I wouldn't have to leave after dark. I even considered quitting, but eventually convinced myself I was overreacting. I worked at that GameStop for another year, always half expecting to see that mask watching me through the windows, but he never came back. At least, not when I was working. Sometimes I wonder if he selected me specifically, or if I was just randomly chosen. I wonder if he followed other people, or if it was just me. Most of all, I wonder who was behind that mask and what they wanted. To this day, I can't explain what happened or why. All I know is that I've never felt so intensely watched or hunted as I did that day. I still get that sick feeling in my stomach when I think about those eye holes staring at me through the bushes and how deliberately he moved toward me across that parking lot. I've never seen him again, but sometimes, especially around Black Friday, I catch myself scanning crowds for someone unusually tall and thin. and I wonder if he's still out there, watching someone else from behind that blank, expressionless mask.